Chapter 8. How the King Hawked on Crooksbury Heath. The king and his attendants had shaken off the crowd who had followed them from Guildford along the Pilgrim's Way, and now, the mounted archers having beaten off the more persistent of the spectators, they rode at their ease in a long, straggling, glittering train over the dark, undulating plain of heather. In the van was the king himself, for his hawks were with him, and he had some hope of sport. Edward at that time was a well-grown, vigorous man in the very prime of his years, a keen sportsman, an ardent gallant, and a chivalrous soldier. He was a scholar too, speaking Latin, French, German, Spanish, and even a little English. So much had long been patent to the world, but only of recent years had he shown other and more formidable characteristics. A restless ambition which coveted his neighbor's throne, and a wise foresight in matters of commerce, which engaged him now in transplanting Flemish weavers and sowing the seeds of what for many years was the staple trade of England. Each of these varied qualities might have been read upon his face. The brow, shaded by a crimson cap of maintenance, was broad and lofty. The large brown eyes were ardent and bold. His chin was clean-shaven, and the close-cropped dark mustache did not conceal the strong mouth, firm, proud, and kindly, but capable of setting tight in merciless ferocity. His complexion was tanned to copper by a life spent in field sports or in war, and he rode his magnificent black horse carelessly and easily, as one who has grown up in the saddle. His own color was black also, for his active, sinewy figure was set off by close-fitting velvet of that hue, broken only by a belt of gold, and by a golden border of open pods of the broom plant. With his high and noble bearing, his simple yet rich attire, and his splendid mount, he looked every inch a king. The picture of gallant man on gallant horse was completed by the noble falcon of the Isles, which fluttered along some 12 feet above his head, waiting on, as it was termed, for any quarry which might arise. The second bird of the cast was borne upon the gauntleted wrist of Raoul, the chief falconer, in the rear. At the right side of the monarch, and a little behind him, rode a youth some 20 years of age, tall, slim and dark, with noble aquiline features and keen penetrating eyes, which sparkled with vivacity and affection as he answered the remarks of the king. He was clad in deep crimson diapered with gold, and the trappings of his white palfrey were of a magnificence which proclaimed the rank of its rider. On his face, still free from mustache or beard, there sat a certain gravity and majesty of expression which showed that young as he was, great affairs had been in his keeping, and that his thoughts and interests were those of the statesman and the warrior. That great day when, little more than a schoolboy, he had led the van of the victorious army which had crushed the power of France and Cressy, had left his stamp upon his features. But stern as they were, they had not assumed that tinge of fierceness which in after years was to make the Black Prince a name of terror on the marches of France. Not yet had the first shadow of fell disease come to poison his nature ere it struck at his life, as he rode that spring day, light and debonair, upon the heath of Crooksbury, on the left of the king, and so near to him that great intimacy was implied, rode a man about his own age, with the broad face, the projecting jaw, and the flattish nose, which are often the outward indications of a pugnacious nature. His complexion was crimson, his large blue eyes somewhat prominent, and his whole appearance full-blooded and choleric. He was short, but massively built, and evidently possessed of immense strength. His voice, however, when he spoke, was gentle and lisping, while his manner was quiet and courteous. Unlike the king or the prince, he was clad in light armor and carried a sword by his side and a mace at his saddle-bow, for he was acting as captain of the king's guard, and a dozen other knights in steel followed in the escort. No hardier soldier could Edward have at his side, if, as was always possible in those lawless times, sudden danger was to threaten, for this was a famous knight of Hainault, now naturalized as an Englishman, Sir Walter Manny, who bore as high a reputation for chivalrous valor and for gallant temerity as Chandos himself. Behind the knights, who were forbidden to scatter and must always follow the king's person, there was a body of 20 or 30 hobblers or mounted bowmen, together with several squires, unarmed themselves but leading spare horses upon which the heavier part of their knight's equipment was carried. A straggling tail of falconers, harbingers, varlets, body servants, and huntsmen holding hounds in leash completed the long and many-colored train which rose and dipped on the low undulations of the mole. Many weighty things were on the mind of Edward the King. There was truce for the moment with France, but it was a truce broken by many small deeds of arms, raids, surprises and ambushes upon either side, and it was certain that it would soon dissolve again into open war. Money must be raised, and it was no light matter to raise it, now that the Commons had once already voted the 10th lamb and the 10th sheaf. Besides, the Black Death had ruined the country. The arable land was all turned to pasture. The labour, laughing at statutes, would not work under fourpence a day, and all society was chaos. In addition, the Scotch were growling over the border. There was a perennial trouble in half-conquered Ireland, and his allies abroad in Flanders and in Brabant were clamouring for the arrears of their subsidies. All this was enough to make even a victorious monarch full of K, but now Edward had thrown it all to the winds and was as light-hearted as a boy upon a holiday. No thought had he for the dunning of Florentine bankers or the vexatious conditions of those busybodies at Westminster. He was out with his hawks, and his thoughts and his talk should be of nothing else. The varlets beat the heather and bushes as they passed, and whooped loudly as the birds flew out. "A magpie! A magpie!" cried the falconer. "Nay, nay, it is not worthy of your talons, my brown-eyed queen," said the king, looking up at the great bird which flapped from side to side above his head, waiting for the whistle which should give the signal. "The tercels, falconer, a cast of tercels. Quick, man, quick. Ha! The rascal makes for wood. He puts in. Well flown, brave peregrine. He makes his point. Drive him out to thy comrade. Serve him, varlets. Beat the bushes. He breaks. He breaks. Nay, come away then. You will see Master Magpie no more." The bird had indeed, with the cunning of its race, flapped its way through brushwood and bushes to the thicker woods beyond, so that neither the hawk amid the cover nor its partner above nor the clamorous beaters could harm it. The king laughed at the mischance and rode on. Continually birds of various sorts were flushed, and each was pursued by the appropriate hawk, the snipe by the tercel, the partridge by the goshawk, even the lark by the little merlin. But the king soon tired of this petty sport and went slowly on his way, still with a magnificent silent attendant flapping above his head. "Is she not a noble bird, fair son?" he asked, glancing up as a shadow fell upon him. "She is indeed, sire. Surely no finer ever came from the Isles of the North." "Perhaps not, and yet I have had a hawk from Barbary as good a footer and a swifter flyer. An eastern bird in Yerak has no peer." "I had one once from the Holy Land," said Demani. "It was fierce and keen and swift as the Saracens themselves. They say of old Saladin that in his day his breed of birds, of hounds, and of horses had no equal on earth. I trust, dear father, that the day may come when we shall lay our hands on all three," said the prince, looking with shining eyes upon the king. "Is the Holy Land to lie forever in the grass with these unbelieving savages, or the Holy Temple to be defiled by their foul presence? Ah, my dear and most sweet lord, give to me 1,000 lances with 10,000 bowmen like those I led at Cressy, and I swear to you by God's soul that within a year I will have done homage to you for the kingdom of Jerusalem." The king laughed as he turned to Walter Manny. "Boys will still be boys," said he. "The French do not count me such," cried the young prince, flushing with anger. "Nay, fair son, there is no one sets you at a higher rate than your father. But you have the nimble mind and quick fancy of youth, turning over from the thing that is half done to a further task beyond. How would we fare in Brittany and Normandy while my young paladin with his lances and his bowmen was besieging Ascalon or battering at Jerusalem? Heaven would help in heaven's work." "From what I have heard of the past," said the king dryly, "I cannot see that heaven has counted for much as an ally in these wars of the East. I speak with reverence. And yet it is but sooth to say that Richard of the Lionheart or Louis of France might have found the smallest earthly principality of greater service to him in all the celestial hosts. How say you to that, my lord bishop?" A stout churchman who had ridden behind the king on a solid bay cob, well suited to his weight and dignity, jogged up to the monarch's elbow. "How say you, sire? I was watching the goshawk on the partridge, and heard you not. Had I said that I would add 2 manors to the see of Chichester, I warrant that you would have heard me, my lord bishop." "Nay, fair lord, test the matter by saying so," cried the jovial bishop. The king laughed aloud. "A fair counter, your reverence. By the rood, you broke your lance that passage. But the question I debated was this: how is it that since the Crusades have manifestly been fought in God's quarrel, we Christians have had so little comfort or support in fighting them? After all our efforts and the loss of more men than could be counted, we are at last driven from a country, and even the military orders which were formed only for that one purpose can scarce hold a footing in the islands of the Greek Sea. There is not one seaport nor one fortress in Palestine over which the flag of the cross still waves. Where then was our ally? Nay, sire, you open a great debate which extends far beyond this question of the Holy Land, though that may indeed be chosen as a fair example. It is a question of all sin, of all suffering, of all injustice, why it should pass without the rain of fire and the lightnings of Sinai. The wisdom of God is beyond our understanding. The king shrugged his shoulders. This is an easy answer, my lord bishop. You are a prince of the church. It would fare with an earthly prince who could give no better answer to the affairs which concerned his realm. There are other considerations which might be urged, most gracious sire. It is true that the Crusades were a holy enterprise which might well expect the immediate blessing of God. But the Crusaders, is it certain that they deserve such a blessing? Have I not heard that their camp was the most dissolute ever seen? Camps are camps all the world over, and you cannot in a moment change a bowman into a saint. But the Holy Louis was a crusader after your own heart. Yet his men perish at Mansura and he himself at Tunis. Bethink you also that this world is but the antechamber of the next, said the prelate. By suffering and tribulation the soul is cleansed, and the true victor may be who by the patient endurance of misfortune merits the happiness to come. If that be the true meaning of the Church's blessing, then I hope that it will be long before it rests upon our banners in France, said the king. But methinks that when one is out with a brave horse and a good hawk one might find some other subject in theology. Back to the birds, bishop, or Raoul the falconer will come to interrupt thee in thy cathedral. Straightway the conversation came back to the mystery of the woods and the mystery of the rivers, to the dark-eyed hawks and the yellow-eyed, to hawks of the lure and hawks of the fist. The bishop was as steeped in the lore of falconry as the king, and the others smiled as the two wrangled hard over disputed and technical questions. If an eye is trained in the muse can ever emulate the passage hawk taken wild, or how long the young hawks should be placed at heck, and how long weathered before they are fully reclaimed. Monarch and prelate were still deep in this learned discussion, the bishop speaking with a freedom and assurance which he would never have dared to use in affairs of church and state, for in all ages there is no such leveller as sport. Suddenly, however, the prince, whose keen eyes had swept from time to time over the great blue heaven, uttered a peculiar call and reined up his palfrey, pointing at the same time into the air. "A heron!" he cried. "A heron on passage!" To gain the full sport of hawking a heron must not be put up from its feeding ground, where it is heavy with its meal, and has no time to get its pace and before it is pounced upon by the more active hawk, but it must be aloft, traveling from point to point, probably from the fish stream to the heronry. Thus to catch the bird on passage was the prelude of all good sport. The object to which the prince had pointed was but a black dot in the southern sky, but his strained eyes had not deceived him, and both bishop and king agreed that it was indeed a heron, which grew larger every instant as it flew in their direction. "Whistle him off, sire, whistle off the gerfalcon," cried the bishop. "Nay, nay, he is over far. She would fly at check." "Now, sire, now," cried the prince, as the great bird with the breeze behind him came sweeping down the sky. The king gave the shrill whistle, and the well-trained hawk raked out to the right and to the left to make sure which quarry she was to follow. Then, spying the heron, she shot up in a swift ascending curve to meet him. "Well flown, Margot, good bird," cried the king, clapping his hands to encourage the hawk, while the falconers broke into the shrill whoop peculiar to the sport. Going on her curve, the hawk would soon have crossed the path of the heron, but the latter, seeing the danger in his front and confident in his own great strength of wing and lightness of body, proceeded to mount higher in the air, flying in such small rings that to the spectators it almost seemed as if the bird was going perpendicularly upward. "I cover your wager, sire," said the bishop. "I may not take gold so won, and yet I warrant that there is an altar cloth somewhere in need of repairs." "You have good store of altar cloths, bishop, if all the gold I have seen you win at tables goes to the mending of them," said the king. "Ah, By the rood, rascal, rascal. See how she flies a check. The quick eyes of the bishop had perceived a drift of rooks when on their evening flight to the rookery were passing along the very line which divided the hawk from the heron. A rook is a hard temptation for a hawk to resist. In an instant, the inconstant bird had forgotten all about the great heron above her and was circling over the rooks, flying westward with them as she singled out the plumpest for her stoop. Or shall I show you, sire, how a peregrine may win where falcon fails, said the bishop. 10 golden pieces to one upon my bird. Done with you, bishop, cried the king, his brow dark with vexation. By the rood, if you were as learned in the fathers as you are in hawks, you would win to the throne of St. Peter. Cast off your peregrine and make your boasting good. Smaller than the royal falcon, the bishop's bird was none the less a swift and beautiful creature. From a perch upon his wrist she had watched with face, keen eyes of birds in the heaven, mantling herself from time to time in her eagerness. Now when the button was undone and the leash uncast, the peregrine dashed off with a whoo of his sharp-pointed wings, whizzing round in a great ascending circle which mounted swiftly upward, growing ever smaller as she approached that lofty point where, a mere speck in the sky, the heron sought escape from its enemies. Still higher and higher the two birds mounted, while the horsemen, their faces upturned, strained their eyes in their efforts to follow them. Nay, nay, she is far below, said the king. By my soul, my lord bishop is right, cried the prince. I believe she is above. See, see, she swoops. She binds, cried a dozen voices as the two dots blended suddenly into one. Thy gold pieces shall be well spent, sire, said he. What is lost to the church is gained by the loser. With one sweep of her great wings she shot up until she was above her rival. The next instant, they crab, cried the king, with a roar of laughter, following them with his eyes as they bustled down through the air. Mend thy own altar clothes. Bishop, not a groat shall you have from me this journey. Pull them apart, falconer, lest they do each other an injury. And now, masters, let us on, for the sun sinks toward the west. The two hawks, which had come to the ground interlocked with clutching talons and ruffled plumes, were torn apart and brought back bleeding and panting to their perches, while the heron after its perilous adventure flapped its way heavily onward to settle safely in the heronry of Waverley. The cordage, who had scattered in the excitement of the chase, came together again, and the journey was once more resumed. A horseman who had been riding toward them across the mere now quickened his pace, and closed swiftly upon them. As he came nearer, the king and the prince cried out joyously and waved their hands in greeting. It is good John Chandos, cried the king. By the rood, John, I have missed your merry songs this week, or more. Glad I am to see that you have your cito slung to your back. Whence come you then? I come from Tilford, sire, in the hope that I should meet your majesty. It was well thought of. Come, ride here between the prince and me, and we will believe that we are back in France with our war harness on our backs once more. What is your news, Master John? Chando's quaint face quivered with suppressed amusement, and his one eye twinkled like a star. Have you had sport, my liege? Poor sport, John. We flew two hawks on the same heron. They crabbed, and the bird got free. But why do you smile so? Because I hope to show you better sport ere you come to Tilford. A nobler sport than either. Thus adjured, the king set spurs to his horse, and the whole cavalcade cantered over the heath in the direction which Chandos showed. Presently, as they came over a slope, they saw beneath them a winding river with an old high-backed bridge across it. On the farther side was a village green with a fringe of cottages and one dark manor house upon the side of the hill. This is Tilford, said Chandos. Yonder is the house of the Lorings. The king's expectations had been aroused, and his face showed his disappointment. I will make them good, my liege. Where then is the sport? On the high crown of the bridge a rider in armor was seated, lance in hand, upon a great yellow steed. Chandos touched the king's arm and pointed. That is the sport, said he. Chapter 9. How Nigel held the bridge at Tilford. The king looked at the motionless figure, at the little crowd of hushed expectant rustics beyond the bridge, and finally at the face of Chandos, which shone with amusement. "What is this, John?" he asked. "You remember Sir Eustace Loring, sire? Indeed, I could never forget him nor the manner of his death. He was a knight-errant in his day. That indeed he was. None better have I known. So is his son Nigel, as fierce a young warhawk as ever yearned to use beak and claws, but held fast in the mews up to now. This is his trial fight. There he stands at the bridgehead, as was the wont in our father's time, ready to measure himself against all comers. Of all Englishmen there was no greater knight-errant than the king himself, and none so steeped in every quaint usage of chivalry, so that the situation was after his own heart. He is not yet a knight. No, sire, only a squire. Then he must bear himself bravely this day if he is to make good what he has done. Is it fitting that a young untried squire should venture to couch his lance against the best in England? He hath given me his cartel and challenge, said Chandos, drawing a paper from his tunic. Have I your permission, sire, to issue it? Surely, John, we have no cavalier more versed in the laws of chivalry than yourself. You know this young man, and you are aware how far he is worthy of the high honor which he asks. Let us hear his defiance. The knights and squires of the escort, most of whom were veterans of the French War, had been gazing with interest and some surprise at the steel-clad figure in front of them. Now at a call from Sir Walter Manny, they assembled round the spot where the king and Chandos had halted. Chandos cleared his throat and read from his paper. "Adieu, seigneurs, chevaliers et esquires." So it is headed, "Gentlemen." It is a message from the good squire Nigel Loring of Tilford, son of Sir Eustace Loring, of honourable memory. Squire Loring awaits you in arms. Gentlemen, yonder upon the crown of the old bridge. Thus says he, "For the great desire that I, a most humble and unworthy squire, entertain, that I may come to the knowledge of the noble gentlemen who ride with my royal master, I now wait on the bridge of the way in the hope that some of them may condescend to do some small deed of arms upon me, or that I may deliver them from any vow which they may have taken. This I say out of no esteem for myself, but solely that I may witness the noble bearing of these famous cavaliers, and admire their skill in the handling of arms. Therefore, with the help of St. George, I will hold the bridge with sharpened lances against any or all who may deign to present themselves while daylight lasts. What say you to this, gentlemen?" asked the king, looking round with laughing eyes. "Truly it is issued in very good form," said the prince. "Neither Clarishix nor Red Dragon nor any herald that ever wore tabard could better it. Did he draw it of his own hand?" "Here the grim old grandmother, who is one of the ancient breed," said Chandos. "I doubt not that the Dame Ermintrude hath drawn a challenge or two before now. But hark ye, sire, I would have a word in your ear, and yours too, most noble prince." Leading them aside, Chandos whispered some explanations, which ended by them all three bursting into a shout of laughter. The soldiers had all been buzzing together, but now Walter Manny turned to the king with the result of their counsel. "If it please your majesty," said he, "we are of opinion that the squire hath exceeded all bounds in desiring to break a spear with a belted knight ere he has given his proofs. We do him sufficient honour if a squire ride against him, and with your consent I have chosen my own body squire, John Widdicombe, to clear the path for us across the bridge." "What you say, Walter, is right and fair," said the king. "Master Chandos, you will tell our champion yonder what had been arranged. You will advise him also that it is our royal will that this contest be not fought upon the bridge, since it is very clear that it must end in one or both going over into the river, but that he advance to the end of the bridge and fight upon the plain. You will tell him also that a blunted lance is sufficient for such an encounter, but that a hand stroke or two with sword or mace may well be exchanged, if both riders should keep their saddles. A blast upon Raoul's horn shall be the signal to close. Such ventures as these, where an aspirant for fame would wait for days at a crossroad, a ford, or a bridge, until some worthy antagonist should ride that way, were very common in the old days of adventurous knight-erranty, and were still familiar to the minds of all men, because the stories of the romances and the songs of the trouveries were full of such incidents. Their actual occurrence, however, had become rare. There was the more curiosity, not unmixed with amusement, in the thoughts of the courtiers as they watched Chandos ride down to the bridge and commented upon the somewhat singular figure of the challenger. His build was strange, and so also was his figure, for the limbs were short for so tall a man. His head also was sunk forward as if he were lost in thought or overcome with deep dejection. "This is surely the cavalier of the heavy heart," said many. "What trouble has he, that he should hang his head?" "Perchance he hath a weak neck," said the king. "At least he hath no weak voice," the prince remarked, as Nigel's answer to Chandos came to their ears. "By Our Lady, he booms like a bittern." As Chandos rode back again to the king, Nigel exchanged the older spear which had been his father's for one of the blunted tournament lances, which he took from the hands of a stout archer in attendance. He then rode down to the end of the bridge where 100-yard stretch of greensward lay in front of him. At the same moment the squire of Sir Walter Manny, who had been hastily armed by his comrades, spurred forward and took up his position. The king raised his hand. There was a clang from a falconer's horn, and the two riders, with a thrust of their heels and a shake of their bridles, dashed furiously at each other. In the center the green strip of marshy meadowland, with the water squirting from the galloping hoofs, and the two crouching men, gleaming bright in the evening sun, on one side the half-circle of motionless horsemen, some in steel, some in velvet, silent and attentive, dogs, hawks, and horses all turned to stone, on the other the old peak bridge, the blue lazy river, the group of open-mouthed rustics, and the dark old manor house with one grim face which peered from the upper window. A good man was John Widdicombe, but he had met a better that day. Before that yellow whirlwind of a horse and that rider who was welded and riveted to his saddle, his knees could not hold their grip. Nigel and Pommers were one flying missile, with all their weight and strength and energy centered on the steady end of the lance. Had Widdicombe been struck by a thunderbolt, he could not have flown faster or farther from his saddle. 2 full somersaults did he make, his plates clanging like cymbals, ere he lay prone upon his back. For a moment the king looked grave at that prodigious fall. Then, smiling once more as Widdicombe staggered to his feet, he clapped his hands loudly in applause. "A fair course and fairly run," he cried. "The 5 scarlet roses bear themselves in peace even as I have seen them in war. How now, my good Walter? Have you another squire, or will you clear a path for us yourself?" Manny's choleric face had turned darker as he observed the mischance of his representative. He beckoned now to a tall knight, whose gaunt and savage face looked out from his open bassinet as an eagle might from a cage of steel. "Sir Hubert," said he, "I bear in mind the day when you overbore the Frenchman at Cannes. Will you not be our champion now?" "When I fought the Frenchman, Walter, it was with naked weapons," said the knight sternly. "I am a soldier and I love a soldier's work, but I care not for these tilt-yard tricks which were invented for nothing but to tickle the fancies of foolish women." "Oh, most ungallant speech," cried the king. "Had my good consort heard you, she would have arraigned you to appear at a court of love with a jury of virgins to answer for your sins. But I pray you to take a tilting spear, good Sir Hubert. I had as soon take a peacock's feather, my fair lord, but I will do it if you ask me. Hey, page, hand me one of those sticks, and let me see what I can do." But Sir Hubert de Burgh was not destined to test either his skill or his luck. The great bay horse which he rode was as unused to this warlike play as was its master, and had none of its master's stoutness of heart, so that when it saw the levelled lance, the gleaming figure, and the frenzied yellow horse rushing down upon it, it swerved, turned, and galloped furiously down the river-bank. Amid roars of laughter from the rustics on the one side and from the courtiers on the other, Sir Hubert was seen, tugging vainly at his bridle, and bounding onward, clearing gorse bushes and heather clumps, until he was but a shimmering, quivering gleam upon the dark hillside. Nigel, who had pulled Pommers on to his very haunches at the instant that his opponent turned, saluted with his lance and trotted back to the bridgehead, where he awaited his next assailant. "The ladies would say that a judgment hath fallen upon our good Sir Hubert for his impious words," said the king. "Let us hope that his charger may be broken in ere they venture to ride out between 2 armies," remarked the prince. "They might mistake the hardness of his horse's mouth for a softness of the rider's heart. See where he rides, still clearing every bush upon his path." "By the rood," said the king, If the bold Hubert has not increased his repute as a jouster, he has gained great honour as a horseman. But the bridge is still closed. Walter, how say you now? Is this young squire never to be unhorsed? Or is your king himself to lay lance in rest ere his way can be cleared? By the head of St. Thomas, I am in the very mood to run a course with this gentle youth. Nay, nay, sire, too much honour hath already been done him, said many, looking angrily at the motionless horseman. That this untried boy should be able to say that in one evening he has unhorsed my squire, and seen the back of one of the bravest knights in England, is surely enough to turn his foolish head. Fetch me a spear, Robert, I will see what I can make of him. The famous knight took the spear when it was brought to him as a master workman takes a tool. He balanced it, shook it once or twice in the air, ran his eyes down it for a flaw in the wood, and then finally, having made sure of its poise and weight, laid it carefully in rest under his arm. Then gathering up his bridle so as to have his horse under perfect command, and covering himself with the shield, which was slung round his neck, he rode out to do battle. Now, Nigel, young and inexperienced, all nature's aid will not help you against the mixed craft and strength of such a warrior. The day will come when neither many nor even Chandos could sweep you from your settle. But now, even had you some less cumbrous armor, your chance was small. Your downfall is near. But as you see the famous black chevrons on a golden ground, your gallant heart, which never knew fear, is only filled with joy and amazement at the honor done you. Your downfall is near, and yet in your wildest dreams you would never guess how strange your downfall is to be. Again with a dull thunder of hoofs the horses gallop over the soft water meadow. Again with a clash of metal the two riders meet. It is Nigel now, taken clean in the face of his helmet with the blunted spear, who flies backward off his horse and falls clanging on the grass. But good heavens, what is this? Many has thrown up his hands in horror, and the lance has dropped from his nerveless fingers. From all sides, with cries of dismay, with oaths and shouts and ejaculations to the saints, the horsemen ride wildly in. Was ever so dreadful, so sudden, so complete, an end to a gentle passage at arms? Surely their eyes must be at fault. Some wizard's trick has been played upon them to deceive their senses. But no, it was only too clear. There on the green sward lay the trunk of the stricken cavalier, and there, a good dozen yards beyond, lay his helmeted head. By the Virgin, cried many wildly, as he jumped from his horse, I would give my last gold piece that the work of this evening should be undone. How came it? What does it mean? Hither, my lord bishop, for surely it smacks of witchcraft and the devil. With a white face the bishop had sprung down beside the prostrate body, pushing through the knot of horrified knights and squires. I fear that the last offices of the Holy Church come too late, said he in a quivering voice. Most unfortunate young man, how sudden an end. In medio vitae, as the Holy Book has it, one moment in the pride of his youth, the next his head torn from his body. Now God and his saint have mercy upon me and guard me from evil. The last prayer was shot out of the bishop with an energy and earnestness unusual in his orisons. It was caused by the sudden outcry of one of the squires who, having lifted the helmet from the ground, cast it down again with a scream of horror. It is empty, he cried. It weighs as light as a feather. For God, it is true, cried many, laying his hand on it. There is no one in it. With what have I fought? Father Bishop, is it of this world or the next? The bishop had clambered on his horse the better to consider the point. If the foul fiend is abroad, said he, my place is over yonder by the king's side. Certes, that sulphur-colored horse of a very devilish look. I could have sworn that I saw both smoke and flame from its nostrils. The beast is fit to bear a suit of armor which rides and fights, and yet hath no man within it. Nay, not too fast. Father Bishop, said one of the knights, it may be all that you say, and yet come from a human workshop. When I made a campaign in South Germany, I have seen at Nuremberg a cunning figure, devised by an armor which could both ride and wield a sword. If this be such a one, I thank you all for your very gentle courtesy, said a booming voice from a figure upon the ground. At the words, even the valiant many sprang into his saddle. Some rode madly away from the horrid trunk. A few of the boldest lingered. Most of all, said the voice, would I thank the most noble knight, Sir Walter Many, that he should deign to lay aside his greatness and condescend to do a deed of arms upon so humble a squire. For God, said many, if this be the devil, then the devil of the very courtly tongue. I will have him out of his armour, if he blast me. So saying, he sprang once more from his horse, and plunging his hand down the slit in the collapsed gorget, he closed it tightly upon a fistful of Nigel's yellow coals. The groan that came forth was enough to convince him that it was indeed a man who lurked within. At the same time his eyes fell upon the hole in the mail corselet which had served the squire as a visor, and he burst into deep-chested mirth. The king, the prince, and Chandos, who had watched the scene from a distance, too much amused by it to explain or interfere, rode up weary with laughter, now that all was discovered. "Let him out," said the king, with his hand to his side. "I pray you to unlace him and let him out. I have shared in many a spurrunning, but never have I been nearer falling from my horse than as I watched this one. I feared the fall had struck him senseless, since he lay so still." Nigel had indeed lain with all the breath shaken from his body, and as he was unaware that his helmet had been carried off, he had not understood either the alarm or the amusement that he had caused. Now freed from the great hauberk in which he had been shut like a pea in a pod, he stood blinking in the light, blushing deeply with shame that the shifts to which his poverty had reduced him should be exposed to all these laughing courtiers. It was the king who brought him comfort. "You have shown that you can use your father's weapons," said he, "and you have proved also that you are the worthy bearer of his name and his arms, for you have within you that spirit for which he was famous. But I wot that neither he nor you would suffer a train of hungry men to starve before your door. So lead on, I pray you, and if the meat be as good as this grace before it, then it will be a feast indeed." Chapter 10. How the King greeted his Seneschal of Calais. It would have fared ill with the good name of Tilford Manor House, and with the housekeeping of the aged Dame Ermintrude, had the king's whole retinue, with his outer and inner marshal, his justiciar, his chamberlain, and his guard, all gathered under the one roof. But by the foresight and the gentle management of Chandos, this calamity was avoided, so that some were quartered at the great abbey and others passed on to enjoy the hospitality of Sir Roger Fitzalan at Farnham Castle. Only the king himself, the prince, many, Chandos, Sir Hubert de Burgh, the bishop, and 2 or 3 more remained behind as the guests of the Lorings. But small as was the party and humble the surroundings, the king in no way relaxed that love of ceremony, of elaborate form, and of brilliant culling which was one of his characteristics. The sumpter mules were unpacked, squires ran hither and thither, baths smoked in the bedchambers, silks and satins were unfolded, gold chains gleamed and clinked, so that when at last, to the long blast of 2 court trumpeters, the company took their seats at the board, it was the brightest, fairest scene which those old black rafters had ever spanned. The great influx of foreign knights who had come in their splendour from all parts of Christendom to take part in the opening of the Round Tower of Windsor 6 years before, and to try their luck and their skill at the tournament connected with it, had deeply modified the English fashions of dress. The old tunic, over-tunic, and cyclist were too sad and simple for the new fashions, so now strange and brilliant cote-hardies, pourpoints, courtepies, poltarks, hanselins, and many other wondrous garments, party-coloured or diapered, with looped, embroidered, or escalloped edges, flamed and glittered round the king. He himself, in black velvet and gold, formed a dark rich centre to the finery around him. On his right sat the prince, on his left the bishop, while Dame Ermintrude marshalled the forces of the household outside, alert and watchful, pouring in her dishes and her flagons at the right moment, rallying her tired servants, encouraging the van, hurrying the rear, hastening up her reserves, the tapping of her oak stick heard everywhere the pressure was the greatest. Behind the king, clad in his best, but looking drab and sorry amid the brilliant costumes round him, Nigel himself, regardless of an aching body and a twisted knee, waited upon his royal guests, who threw many a merry jest at him over their shoulders as they still chuckled at the adventure of the bridge. "By the rood," said King Edward, leaning back, with a chicken bone held daintily between the courtesy fingers of his left hand, "the play is too good for this country stage. You must to Windsor with me, Nigel, and bring with you this great suit of harness in which you lurk. There you shall hold the list with your eyes and your midriff, and unless some one cleave you to the waist, I see not how any harm can befall you. Never have I seen so small a nut in so great a shell." The prince, looking back with laughing eyes, so by Nigel flushed and embarrassed face that his poverty hung heavily upon him. "Nay," said he kindly, "such a workman is surely worthy of better tools." Nigel, red to the roots of his flaxen hay, stammered out some words of thanks. John Chandos, however, had a fresh suggestion, and he cocked a roguish eye as he made it. "Surely, my liege, your bounty is little needed in this case. It is the ancient law of arms that if two cavaliers start to joust, and one either by maladdress or misadventure fail to meet the shock, then his arms become the property of him who still holds the lists. This being so, methinks, Sir Hubert de Burgh, that the fine hauberk of Milan and the helmet of Bordeaux steel, in which you rode to Tilford, should remain with our young host as some small remembrance of your visit." The suggestion raised a general chorus of approval and laughter, in which all joined, save only Sir Hubert himself, who, flushed with anger, fixed his baleful eyes upon Chandos' mischievous and smiling face. "I said that I did not play that foolish game, and I know nothing of its laws," said he. "But you know well, John, that if you would have a bout with sharpened spear or sword, where two ride to the ground, and only one away from it, you have not far to go to find it." "Nay, nay, would you ride to the ground? Surely you had best walk, Hubert," said Chandos. "On your feet I know well that I should not see your back as we have seen it today. Say what you will, your horse has played you false, and I claim your suit of harness for Nigel Loring. Your tongue is overlong, John, and I am weary of its endless clack," said Sir Hubert, his yellow moustache bristling from a scarlet face. "If you claim my harness, do you yourself come and take it. If there is a moon in the sky, you may try this very night when the board is cleared." "Nay, fair sirs," cried the king, smiling from one to the other, "this matter must be followed no further. Do you fill a bumper of Gascony, John, and you also, Hubert. Now pledge each other, I pray you, as good and loyal comrades who would scorn to fight save in your king's quarrel. We can spare neither of you while there is so much work for brave hearts over the sea. As to this matter of the harness, John Chandos speaks truly where it concerns a joust in the lists, but we hold that such a law is scarce binding in this, which was but a wayside passage and a gentle trial of arms. On the other hand, in the case of your squire, Master Manny, there can be no doubt that his suit is forfeit." "It is a grievous hearing for him, my liege," said Walter Manny, "for he is a poor man and have been at sore pains to fit himself for the wars. Yet what you say shall be done, fair sire. So, if you will come to me in the morning, Squire Loring, John Widdicombe's suit will be handed over to you." "Then, with the king's leave, I will hand it back to him," said Nigel, troubled and stammering. "For indeed I had rather never ride to the wars than take from a brave man his only suit of plate." "There spoke your father's spirit," cried the king. "By the rood, Nigel, I like you full well. Let the matter bide in my hands. But I marvel much that Sir Aymer the Lombard hath not come to us yet from Windsor." The tramp and jingle of the horses broke loud upon the ear, and ended in hoarse voices calling out of the darkness, which were answered by the archers posted as sentries without the door. "Some traveller has indeed arrived, my liege," said Nigel. "What is your royal will?" "It can be but Aymer," the king answered, "for it was only to him that I left the message that he should follow me hither. Bid him come in, I pray you, and make him very welcome at your board." Nigel cast open the door, plucking a torch from its bracket as he did so. Half a dozen men-at-arms sat on their horses outside, but one had dismounted, a short, squat, swarthy man with a rat face and quick, restless brown eyes which peered eagerly past Nigel into the red glare of the well-lit hall. "He is at table, fair sir, and he bids you to enter." "One moment, young man, one moment, and a secret word in your ear. What you wide is that the king has sent for me." Nigel read terror in the dark, cunning eyes which glanced in sidelong fashion into his. "Nay, I know not. I would I knew. I would I was sure I sought his presence. You have but to cross the threshold, fair sir, and doubtless you will learn from a king's own lips." Sir Aymer seemed to gather himself as one who braces for a spring into ice-cold water. Then he crossed with a quick stride from the darkness into the light. The king stood up and held out his hand with a smile upon his long, handsome face, and yet it seemed to the Italian that it was the lips which smiled but not the eyes. "Welcome," cried Edward. "Welcome to our worthy and faithful seneschal of Calais. Come, sit here before me at the board, for I have sent for you that I may hear your news from over the sea, and thank you for the care that you have taken of that which is as dear to me as wife or child. Set a place for Sir Amory there, and get him food and drink, for he has ridden fast and far in our service today." Throughout the long feast which the skill of the Lady Ermintrude had arranged, Edward chatted lightly with the Italian as well as with the barons near him. Finally, when the last dish was removed and the gravy-soaked rounds of coarse bread which served as plates had been cast to the dogs, the wine flagons were passed round, and old Weathercoat, the minstrel, entered timidly with his harp in the hope that he might be allowed to play before the king's majesty. But Edward had other sport afoot. "I pray you, Nigel, to send out the servants so that we may be alone. I would have 2 men-at-arms at every door lest we be disturbed in our debate, for it is a matter of privacy. And now, Sir Amory, these noble lords as well as I, your master, would fain hear from your own lips how all goes forward in France." The Italian's face was calm, but he looked restlessly from one to another along the line of his listeners. "So far as I know, my liege, all is quiet on the French marches," said he. "You have not heard, then, that they have mustered or gathered to a head with the intention of breaking the truce and making some attempt upon our dominions?" "Nay, sire, I have heard nothing of it." "You set my mind much at ease, Amory," said the king, "for if nothing has come to your ears, then surely it cannot be. It was said that the wild knight de Charny had come down to St. Omer with his eyes upon my precious jewel, and his mailed hands ready to grasp it." "Nay, sire, let him come. He will find the jewel safe in its strong box, with a goodly guard over it." "You are the guard over my jewel, Amory." "Yes, sire, I am the guard." "Nay, sire, what reasons can there be for such questions? They touch my honor very nearly. You know that I would part with Calais only when I parted with my soul." "Then you know nothing of de Charny's attempt?" "Nothing, sire." "Liar and villain!" yelled the king, springing to his feet and dashing his fist upon the table until the glasses rattled again. "Seize him, archers! Seize him this instant! Stand close by either elbow, lest he do himself a mischief. Now do you dare to tell me to my face, you perjured Lombard, that you know nothing of de Charny and his plans?" "As God is my witness, I know nothing of him." The man's lips were white, and he spoke in a thin, sighing, reedy voice, his eyes wincing away from the fell gaze of the angry king. "It is my name, sire, but no such letter has come to me. Else had your villainy never been disclosed. It is signed Isidore de Charny. What says my enemy de Charny to my trusted servant? Listen, we could not come with the last moon, for we have not gathered sufficient strength, nor have we been able to collect the 20,000 crowns which are your price. But with the next turn of the moon in the darkest hour we will come, and you will be paid your money at the small postern gate with the rowan bush beside it. Well, rogue, what say you now?" "It is a forgery," gasped the Italian. "I pray you that you will let me see it." "Sire," said Chandos, "de Charny was my prisoner, and so many letters passed ere his ransom was paid that his script is well known to me. Yes, yes, I will swear that this is indeed his. If my salvation were at stake, I could swear it. If it were indeed written by de Charny, it was addition to me," cried Sir Amory. A gruff murmur from the others showed that they were of one mind with the prince. The light of the torches from the walls beat upon the line of stern faces at the high table. They had set like flint, and the Italian shrank from their inexorable eyes. He looked swiftly round, but armed men choked every entrance. The shadow of death had fallen athwart his soul. "This letter," said the king, "was given by de Charny to one Dom Beauvais, a priest of St. Omer, to carry into Calais. The said priest, smelling a reward, brought it to one who was my faithful servant, and so it came to me. Straightway I sent for this man that he should come to me. Meanwhile the priest has returned, so that de Charny may think that his message is indeed delivered." "I know nothing of it," said the Italian doggedly, licking his dry lips. Sire, he is guilty. It can only be death, said the prince, and each in turn the others nodded their agreement. The Italian, who had slipped from his chair to his knees, uttered a cry of despair as an archer seized him by either shoulder. Writhing out of their grip, he threw himself upon the floor and clutched at the king's feet. "Spare me, my most dread lord. Spare me, I beseech you. In the name of Christ's passion, I implore your grace and pardon. Bethink you, my good and dear lord, how many years I have served under your banners and how many services I have rendered. Was it not I who found the ford upon the Seine 2 days before the great battle? Was it not I also who marshaled the attack at the intaking of Calais? I have a wife and 4 children in Italy, great king, and it was a thought of them which led me to fall from my duty, for this money would have allowed me to leave the wars and to see them once again. Mercy, my liege, mercy, I implore. The English are a rough race, but not a cruel one. The king sat with a face of doom, but the others looked askance and fidgeted in their seats. Indeed, my fair liege, said Chandos, I pray that you will abate somewhat of your anger. Edward shook his head curtly. Be silent, John. It shall be as I have said. I pray you, my dear and honored liege, not to act with overmuch haste in the matter, said many. Bind him and hold him until the morning, for other counsels may prevail. Nay, I have spoken. Lead him out. But the trembling man clung to the king's knees in such a fashion that the archers could not disengage his convulsive grip. Listen to me a moment, I implore you. Give me but 1 minute to plead with you, and then do what you will. You must spare me, my noble liege. For your own sake I say that you must spare me, for I can set you in the way of such a knightly adventure as will gladden your heart. Bethink you, sire, that this Achani and his comrades know nothing of their plans having gone awry. If I do but send them a message, they will surely come to the postern gate. Then, if we have placed our bushment with skill, we shall have such a capture and such a ransom as will fill your coffers. He and his comrades should be worth a good 100,000 crowns. Edward spurned the Italian away from him with his foot until he sprawled among the rushes. But even as he lay there like a wounded snake, his dark eyes never left the king's face. You double traitor, you would sell Calais to Dachani, and then in turn you would sell Dachani to me. How dare you suppose that I or any noble knight had such a huckster's soul as to think only of ransoms where honor is to be won? Could I or any true man be so caitiff and so thrall? You have sealed your own doom. Lead him out. 1 instant, I pray you, my fair and most sweet lord, cried the prince. Assuage your wrath yet a little while, for this man's rede deserves perhaps more thought than we have given it. He has turned your noble soul sick with his talk of ransoms. But look at it, I pray you, from the side of honor, and where could we find such hope of worshipfully winning worship? I pray you to let me put my body in this adventure, for it is one from which, if rightly handled, much advancement is to be gained. Edward looked with sparkling eyes at the noble youth at his side. Never was hound more keen on the track of a stricken heart than you on the hope of honor. Fair son, said he, how do you conceive the matter in your mind? Dachani and his men will be such as are worth going far to meet, for he will have the pick of France under his banner that night. If we did as this man says and awaited him with the same number of lances, then I cannot think that there is any spot in Christendom where one would rather be than in Calais that night. By the rood, fair son, you are right, cried the king, his face shining with the thought. Now which of you, John Chandos or Walter Manny, will take the thing in charge? He looked mischievously from one to the other like a master who dangles a bone betwixt 2 fierce old hounds. All they had to say was in their burning, longing eyes. Nay, John, you must not take it amiss, but it is Walter's turn, and he shall have it. Shall we not all go under your banner, sire, or that of the prince? Nay, it is not fitting that the royal banners of England should be advanced in so small an adventure. And yet, if you have space in your ranks for 2 more cavaliers, both the prince and I would ride with you that night. The young man stooped and kissed his father's hand. Take this man in your charge, Walter, and do with him as you will. God well lest he betray us once again. Take him from my sight, for his breath poisons the room. And now, Nigel, if that worthy greybeard of thine would fain twang his harp or sing to us. But what in God's name would you have? He had turned, to find his young host upon his knee and his flaxen head bent in entreaty. What is it, man? What do you crave? A boon, fair liege. Well, am I to have no peace tonight, with a traitor kneeling to me in front, and a true man on his knees behind? Out with it, Nigel. What would you have? To come with you to Calais. By the rood, your request is fair enough, seeing our plot is hatched beneath your very roof. How say you, Walter? Will you take him, arm and all? Asked King Edward. Say rather will you take me, said Chandos. We two are rivals in honour, Walter, but I am very sure that you would not hold me back. Nay, John, I will be proud to have the best lance in Christendom beneath my banner, and I to follow so knightly a leader. But Nigel Loring is my squire, and so he comes with us also. Then that is settled, said the king, and now there is no need for hurry, since there can be no move until the moon has changed. So I pray you to pass the flagon once again, and to drink with me to the good knights of France. May they be of great heart and high of enterprise when we all meet once more within the castle wall of Calais. Chapter 11. In the hall of the Knight of Juplin. The king had come and had gone. Tilford Manor House stood once more dark and silent, but joy and contentment reigned within its walls. In one night every trouble had fallen away like some dark curtain which had shut out the sun. A princely sum of money had come from the king's treasurer, given in such fashion that there could be no refusal. With a bag of gold pieces at his saddlebow, Nigel rode once more into Guildford, and not a beggar on the way who had not cause to bless his name. They had gone first to the goldsmith, and had bought back cup and salver and bracelet, mourning with the merchant over the evil chance that gold and gold work had for certain reasons which only those in the trade could fully understand gone up in value during the last week, so that already 50 gold pieces had to be paid more than the price which Nigel had received. In vain the faithful Aylward fretted and fumed, and muttered a prayer that the day would come when he might feather a shaft in the merchant's portly paunch. The money had to be paid. Thence Nigel hurried toward the armourer's, and there he bought that very suit for which he had yearned so short a time before. Then and there he tried it on in the booth, and his boy walking round him with spanner and wrench, fixing bolts and twisting rivets. How is that, my fair sir? Cried the armourer as he drew the bassinet over the head and fastened it to camail, which extended to the shoulders. I swear by Tubal Cain that it fits you as the shell fits the crab. A finer shoot never came from Italy or Spain. Nigel stood in front of a burnished shield which served as a mirror, and he turned his way in that, preening himself like a little shining bird. His smooth breastplate, his wondrous joints with their deft protection by the discs at knee and elbow and shoulder, the beautifully flexible gauntlets and soles, the shirt of mail and the close-fitting greave-plates were all things of joy and of beauty in his eyes. He sprang about the shop to show his lightness, and then running out he placed his hand on the pommel and vaulted into Pomer's saddle, while and his boy applauded in the doorway. Then springing off and running into the shop again, he clanked down upon his knees before the image of the Virgin upon the smithy wall. There from his heart he prayed that no shadow or stain should come upon his soul or his honour whilst these arms encase his body, and that he might be strengthened to use them for noble and godly ends. A strange turn this to a religion of peace, and yet for many a century the sword and the faith had upheld each other, and in a darkened world the best ideal of the soldier had turned in some dim groping fashion toward the light. Benedictus Dominus Deus mus qui deset manus mis ad prelium et digitos meos ad bellum. There spoke the soul of the knightly soldier. So the armour was trussed upon the armourer's mule and went back with him to Tilford, when Nigel put on once more for the pleasure of the Lady Ermintrude, who clapped her skinny hands and shed tears of mingled pain and joy, pain that she should lose him, joy that he should go so bravely to the wars. As to her own future, it had been made easy for her, since it was arranged that a steward should look to the Tilford estate while she had at her disposal a suite of rooms in Royal Windsor, where with other venerable dames of her own age and standing she could spend the twilight of her days discussing long-forgotten scandals and whispering sad things about the grandfathers and the grandmothers of the young courtiers all around them. Then Nigel might leave her with an easy mind when he turned his face to France. But there was one more visit to be paid and one more farewell to be spoken, and Nigel could leave the moorlands where he had dwelled so long. That evening he donned his brightest tunic, dark purple velvet of Genoa, with trimming of minever, his hat with a snow-white feather curling round the front, and his belt of embossed silver round his loins. Mounted on lordly pommers, with his hawk upon wrist and his sword by his side, never did fairer young gallant or one more modest in mind set forth upon such an errand. It was but the old knight of Juplin to whom he would say farewell. But the knight of Juplin had 2 daughters, Edith and Mary, and Edith was the fairest maid in all the heather country. Sir John Buddisthorne, the knight of Juplin, was so called because he had been present at that strange battle, some 18 years before, when the full power of Scotland had been for a moment beaten to the ground by a handful of adventurers and mercenaries, marching under the banner of no nation, but fighting in their own private quarrel. Their exploit fills no pages of history, for it is to the interest of no nation to record it, and yet the rumor and fame of the great fight bulked large in those times, for it was on that day when the flower of Scotland was left dead upon the field, that the world first understood that a new force had arisen in war, and that the English archer, with his robust courage and his skill with the weapon which he had wielded from his boyhood, was a power with which even the mailed chivalry of Europe had seriously to reckon. Sir John, after his return from Scotland, had become the king's own head huntsman, famous through all England for his knowledge of venery, until at last, getting over-heavy for his horses, he had settled in modest comfort into the old house of Cosford upon the eastern slope of the Hindhead Hill. Hey, as his face grew redder and his beard more white, he spent the evening of his days amid hawks and hounds, a flagon of spiced wine ever at his elbow, and his swollen foot perched upon a stool before him. There it was that many an old comrade broke his journey as he passed down the rude road which led from London to Portsmouth, and thither also came the young gallants of the country to hear the stout knight's tales of old wars, or to learn from him that lore of the forest and the chase which none could teach so well as he. But sooth to say, whatever the old knight might think, it was not merely his old tales and older wine which drew the young men to Cosford, but rather the fair face of his younger daughter, or the strong soul and wise counsel of the elder. Never had 2 more different branches sprung from the same trunk. Both were tall and of a queenly, graceful figure, but their all resemblance began and ended. Edith was yellow as the ripe corn, blue-eyed, winning, mischievous, with a chattering tongue, a merry laugh, and a smile which a dozen of young gallants, Nigel of Tilford at their head, could share equally amongst them. Like a young kitten, she played with all things that she found in life, and some there were who thought that already the claws could be felt amid the patting of a velvet touch. Mary was dark as night, grey-featured, plain-visaged, with steady brown eyes looking bravely at the world from under strong black arch of brows. None could call her beautiful, and when her fair sister cast her arm round her and placed her cheek against hers, as was a habit when company was there, the fairness of the one and the plainness of the other leaped visibly to the eyes of all, each the clearer for that hard contrast. And yet, here and there was one who, looking at a strange, strong face, and at the passing gleams far down in her dark eyes, felt that this silent woman with a proud bearing and a queenly grace had in her something of strength, of reserve, and of mystery which was more to them than all the dainty glitter of her sister. Such were the ladies of Cosford toward whom Nigel Loring rode that night with doublet of genuine velvet, and the new white feather in his cap. Nigel glanced back at the old grey boulder, and he felt for an instant a shudder pass through his stout heart. Was it the chill of the evening air, or was it that some inner voice had whispered to him of the day when he also might lie bound on such a rock and have such a blood-stained pagan crew howling around him? An instant later the rock and his vague fear and all things else had passed from his mind, for there, down the yellow sandy path, the setting sun gleaming on a golden hay, her lithe figure bending and swaying with every heave of the cantering horse, was none other than the same fair Edith, whose face had come so often betwixt him and his sleep. His blood rushed hot to his face at the sight, for fearless of all else, his spirit was attracted and yet daunted by the delicate mystery of woman. To his pure and knightly soul not Edith alone, but every woman, set high and aloof, enthroned and exalted, with 1,000 mystic excellencies and virtues which raise a far above the rude world of man. There was joy in contact with them, and yet there was fear, for lest his own unworthiness, his untrained tongue or rougher ways should in some way break rudely upon this delicate and tender thing. Such was his thought as the white horse cantered toward him. But a moment later his vague doubts were set at rest by the frank voice of the young girl, who waved her whip in merry greeting. "Hail and well met, Nigel," she cried. "Whither away this evening?" Sure I am that it is not to see your friends of Cosford. For when did you ever don so brave a doublet for us? Come, Nigel, her name, that I may hate her for ever. Nay, Edith, said the young squire, laughing back at the laughing girl. I was indeed coming to Cosford. Nigel's answer was in his eyes as he glanced at the fair flushed face, the golden hair, the sparkling eyes, and the daintily graceful figure set off in a scarlet and black riding dress. You as fair as ever, Edith. Oh, code of speech. Surely you were bred for the cloisters, and not for a lady's bower, Nigel. Had I asked such a question from young Sir George Brocas or the Squire of Fernhurst, he would have raved from here to Cosford. They are both more to my taste than you are, Nigel. It is the worse for me, Edith, said Nigel ruefully. Nay, but you must not lose heart. Have I not already lost it? Said he. That is better, she cried, laughing. You can be quick enough when you choose, Master Malapert, but you are more fit to speak of high and weary matters with my sister Mary. She will have none of the prattle and courtesy of Sir George, and yet I love them well. But tell me, Nigel, why do you come to Cosford tonight? To bid you farewell. Me alone. Nay, Edith, you and your sister Mary and the good knight your father. Sir George would have said that he had come for me alone. Indeed, you are but a poor courtier beside him. But is it true, Nigel, that you go to France? Yes, Edith. It was so rumored after the king had been to Tilford. The story goes that the king goes to France and you in his train. Is that true? Yes, Edith, it is true. Tell me, then, to what part you go, and when? That, alas, I may not say. Oh, in sooth. She tossed a fair head and rode onward in silence, with compressed lips and angry eyes. Your honor belongs to you, and my likings belong to me, said she. You hold fast to the one, and I will do the same by the other. What would you do if I were injured, Nigel? I have heard my father say that small as you are, there is no man in these parts could stand against you. Would you be my champion if I suffered wrong? Surely I, or any man of gentle blood, will be the champion of any woman who had suffered wrong. You or any, and I or any. What sort of speech is that? Is it a compliment, think you, to be mixed with a drove in that fashion? My question was of you and me. If I were wronged, would you be my man? Try me and see, Edith. Then I will do so, Nigel. Either Sir George Brocas or the Squire of Fernhurst would gladly do what I ask, and yet I am of a mind, Nigel, to turn to you. I pray you to tell me what it is. You know Paul de la Fosse of Shalford. You mean the small man with the twisted back. He is no smaller than yourself, Nigel, and as to his back there are many folk that I know who will be glad to have his face. Nay, I am no judge of that, and I spoke out of no discourtesy. What of the man? He has flouted me, Nigel, and I would have revenge. What, on that poor twisted creature? I tell you that he has flouted me. But how? I should have thought that a true cavalier would have flown to my aid, withouten all these questions. But I will tell you, since I needs must. Know then that he was one of those who came around me and professed to be my own. Then, merely because he thought that there were others who were as dear to me as himself, he left me, and now he pays court to Maud Twynham, the little freckle-faced hussy in his village. But how has this hurt you, since he was no man of thine? He was one of my men, was he not? And he has made game of me to his wench. He has told her things about me. He has made me foolish in her eyes. Yes, I can read it in a saffron face and in her watery eyes when we meet at the church door on Sundays. She smiles, yes, smiles at me. Nigel, go to him. Do not slay him, nor even wound him, but lay his face open with thy riding whip, and then come back to me and tell me how I can serve you. Nigel's face was haggard with the strife within, for desire ran hot in every vein, and yet reason shrank with horror. By St. Paul, Edith, he cried, I see no honor nor advancement of any sort in this thing which you have asked me to do. Is it for me to strike one who is no better than a cripple? For my manhood I could not do such a deed, and I pray you, dear lady, that you will set me some other task." Nigel flushed and winced under the words, but he said no more, for his mind was fighting hard within him, striving to keep that high image of woman which seemed for a moment to totter on the edge of a fall. Together in silence, side by side, the little man and the stately woman, the yellow charger and the white jennet, passed up the sandy winding track with the gorse and the bracken head-high on either side. Soon a path branched off through a gateway marked with the boarheads of the butterthorns, and there was a low, widespread house heavily timbered, loud with the barking of dogs. The ruddy knight limped forth with outstretched hand and roaring voice. She stood framed in the doorway, tall, mystic, silent, with strange, wistful face and deep soul shining in her dark, questioning eyes. Nigel kissed the hand that she held out, and all his faith in woman and his reverence came back to him as he looked at her. Her sister had slipped behind her, and her fair elfish face smiled her forgiveness of Nigel over Mary's shoulder. The knight of Juplin leaned his weight upon the young man's arm and limped his way across the great high-roof hall to his capacious oaken chair. "Come, come, the stool, Edith," he cried. "As God is my help, that girl's mind swarms with gallants as a granary with rats. Well, Nigel, I hear strange tales of your spear-running at Tilford and of the visit of the king. How seemed he? And my old friend Chandos, many happy hours in the woodlands have we had together, and many too. He was ever a bold and a hard rider. What news of them all?" Nigel told to the old knight all that had occurred, saying little of his own success and much of his own failure. Yet the eyes of the dark woman burned the brighter as she sat at a tapestry and listened. Sir John followed the story with a running fire of oaths, prayers, thumps with his great fist and flourishes of his crutch. Well, lad, you could scarce expect to hold your settle against many, and you have carried yourself well. We are proud of you, Nigel, for you are our own man, reared in the heather country. But indeed I take shame that you are not more skilled in the mystery of the woods, seeing that I have had the teaching of you, and that no one in broad England is my master at the craft. I pray you to fill your cup again whilst I make use of the little time that is left to us." And straightway the old knight began a long and weary lecture upon the times of grace, and when each beast and bird was seasonable, with many anecdotes, illustrations, warnings, and exceptions, drawn from his own great experience. He spoke also of the several ranks and grades of the chase, how the hare, hart, and bull must ever take precedence over the buck, the doe, the fox, the marten, and the roe, even as a knight banneret does over a knight, while these in turn are of a higher class of the badger, the wildcat, or the otter, who are but the common populace of the world of beasts. Of bloodstains also he spoke, how the skilled hunter may see at a glance if blood be dark and frothy, which means a mortal hurt, or thin and clear, which means that the arrow has struck a bone. "By such signs," said he, "you will surely know whether to lay on the hounds and cast down the blinks which hinder the stricken deer in its flight. But above all I pray you, Nigel, to have a care in the use of the terms of the craft, lest you should make some blunder at table, so that those who are wiser may have the laugh of you, and we who love you may be shamed." "Nay, Sir John," said Nigel, "I think that after your teaching I can hold my place with the others." "I know it, fair sir." "A seat of badgers, fair sir." "Good, Nigel, good, by my faith. And if you walk in Woolmer Forest and see a swarm of foxes, how would you call it?" "A skulk of foxes." "And if they be lions?" "Nay, fair sir, I am not like to meet several lions in Woolmer Forest." "One says a singular of bulls." "And if they be swine?" "Surely it is a herd of swine." "Nay, I know not," said the girl listlessly. A crumpled note brought in by a varlet was clenched in her right hand, and her blue eyes looked afar into the deep shadows of the roof. "But you can tell us, Mary." "Surely, sweet sir, one talk of a sounder of swine." The old knight laughed exultantly. "Here is a pupil who never brings me shame," he cried. "Be it law, of chivalry or heraldry or woodcraft or what you will, I can always turn to Mary. Many a man can she put to the blush." "Myself among them," said Nigel. Surely, fair sir, it should be a nigh of pheasants. Good, Nigel, a nigh of pheasants, even as it is a gaggle of geese or a battling of ducks, a fall of woodcock or a wisp of snipe. But a covey of pheasants. What sort of talk is that? I made him sit even where you were sitting, Nigel, and I saw the bottom of 2 pots of Rhenish ere I let him up. Even then I fear that he had no great profit from his lesson, for he was casting his foolish eyes at Edith when he should have been turning his ears to her father. But where's the wench? She hath gone forth, father. Chapter 12. How Nigel fought the twisted man of Shalford. In the days of which you read, all classes, say perhaps the very poor, fared better in meat and in drink than they have ever done since. The country was covered with woodlands. There were 70 separate forests in England alone, some of them covering half a shire. Within these forests the great beasts of the chase were strictly preserved, but the smaller game, the hares, the rabbits, the birds, which swarmed round the coverts, found their way readily into the poor man's pot. Ale was very cheap, and cheaper still was the mead which every peasant could make for himself out of the wild honey in the tree trunks. There were many tea-like drinks also, which were brewed by the poor at no expense, mellow tea, tansy tea, and others the secret of which is past. Amid the richer classes there was rude profusion, great joints ever on the sideboard, huge pies, beasts of the field and beasts of the chase, with ale and rough French or Rhenish wines to wash them down. But the very rich had attained to a high pitch of luxury in their food, and cookery was a science in which the ornamentation of the dish was almost as important as the dressing of the food. It was gilded, it was silvered, it was painted, it was surrounded with flame. From the boar and the peacock down to such strange food as the porpoise and the hedgehog, every dish had its own setting and its own sauce, very strange and very complex, with flavorings of dates, currants, cloves, vinegar, sugar and honey, of cinnamon, ground ginger, sandalwood, saffron, brawn, and pines. It was a Norman tradition to eat in moderation, but to have a great profusion of the best and of the most delicate from which to choose. From them came this complex cookery, so unlike the rude and often gluttonous simplicity of the old Teutonic stock. Sir John Butestone was of that middle class who fared in the old fashion, and his great oak supper table groaned beneath the generous pastries, the mighty joints, and the great flagons. Below were the household, above on a raised dais the family table, with places ever ready for those frequent guests who dropped in from the high road outside. Such a one had just come, an old priest, journeying from the Abbey of Chertsey to the Priory of St. John at Midhurst. He passed often that way, and never without breaking his journey at the hospitable board of Cosford. The priest, a kindly, quiet man, glanced at an empty place upon the farther side of his host. "Mistress Edith," said he. "Aye, aye. Where's the hussy?" cried her father impatiently. "Mary, I beg you to have a horn blown again, that she may know that the supper is on the table. What can the little owlet do abroad at this hour of the night?" "I pray you, good Sir John, to abate your voice somewhat, for indeed this matter is for our private discourse, since it touches the honour of a lady." "I trust that I have done no wrong," said John, "but indeed I must say what I have seen, else would I be a false friend and an unworthy priest." "Haste, man, haste! What in the devil's name have you seen?" "Know you a little man, partly misshapen, named Paul de la Fosse?" "I know him well. He is a man of noble family and coat armour, being the younger brother of Sir Eustace de la Fosse of Shalford. Time was when I had thought that I might call him son, for there was never a day that he did not pass with my girls, but I fear that his crooked back spared him ill in his wooing. Alas, Sir John, it is his mind that is more crooked than his back. He is a perilous man with women, for the devil had given him such a tongue and such an eye that he charms them even as a basilisk. Marriage may be in their mind, but never in his, so that I could count a dozen and more whom he has led to their undoing. It is his pride and his boast over the whole countryside. Well, well, and what is this to me or mine? Even now, Sir John, as I rode my mule up the road, I met this man speeding toward his home. A woman rode by his side, and though her face was hooded, I heard her laugh as she passed me. That laugh I have heard before, and it was under this very roof, from the lips of Mistress Edith. "Fear not, father," said the girl. "Indeed, the good Father Athanasius has fallen into error, and Edith will be with us anon. I have heard her speak of this man many times of late, and always with bitter words." "It is true, sir," cried Nigel eagerly. "It was only this very evening as we rode over Thursday Mayo that Mistress Edith told me that she counted him not a fly, and that she would be glad if he were beaten for his evil deeds." But the wise priest shook his silvery locks. "Nay, there is ever danger when a woman speaks like that. Hot hate is twin brother to hot love. Why should she speak so if there were not some bond between them?" "And yet," said Nigel, "what can have changed her thoughts in 3 short hours? She was here in the hole with us since I came. By St. Paul, I will not believe it." Mary's face darkened. "I call to mind," said she, "that a note was brought her by Hannekin the stable varlet when you were talking to us, fair sir, of the terms of the chase." She read it and went forth. Sir John sprang to his feet, but sank into his chair again with a groan. "Would that I were dead," he cried, "ere I saw Dishner come upon my house, and am so tied with this accursed foot that I can neither examine if it be true, nor yet avenge it. If my son Oliver were here, then all would be well. Send me this stable varlet that I may question him." "I pray you, fair and honoured sir," said Nigel, "that you will take me for your son this night, that I may handle this matter in the way which seems best. On jeopardy of my honour I will do all that a man may." "Nigel, I thank you. There is no man in Christendom to whom I would sooner turn. But I would lean your mind in one matter, fair sir. This man, Paul de la Fosse, owns broad acres, as I understand, and comes of noble blood. There is no reason, if things be as we fear, that he should not marry your daughter. Nay, she could not wish for better. It is well, and first I would question this Hannekin, but it shall be done in such a fashion that none shall know, for indeed it is not a matter for the gossip of servants. But if you will show me the man, Mistress Mary, I will take him out to tend my own horse, and so I shall learn all that he has to tell." Nigel was absent for some time, and when he returned the shadow upon his face brought little hope to the anxious hearts at the high table. "I have locked him in the stable loft, lest he talk too much," said he, "for my questions must have shown him whence the wind blew. It was indeed from this man that the note came, and he had brought with him a spare horse for the lady." The old knight groaned, and his face sank upon his hands. "Nay, father, there what you," whispered Mary. "For the honour of our house let us keep a bold face to all." Then, raising a young clear voice, so that it sounded through the room, "If you ride eastward, Nigel, I would fain go with you, that my sister may not come back alone." "We will ride together, Mary," said Nigel, rising, then in a lower voice. "But we cannot go alone, and if we take a servant all is known. I pray you to stay at home and leave the matter with me." "Nay, Nigel, she may sorely need a woman's aid, and what woman should it be save her own sister? I can take my tirewoman with us." "Nay, I shall ride with you myself if your impatience can keep within the powers of my mule," said the old priest. "But it is not your road, father. The only road of a true priest is that which leads to the good of others. Come, my children, and we will go together." And so it was that stout Sir John Buttersthorn, the aged knight of Juplin, was left alone at his own high table, pretending to eat, pretending to drink, fidgeting in his seat, trying hard to seem unconcerned with his mind and body in a fever, while below him his varlets and handmaids laughed and jested, clattering their cups and clearing their trenchers, all unconscious of the dark shadow which threw its gloom over the lonely man upon the dais above. Meantime the Lady Mary upon the white jennet which his sister had ridden on the same evening, Nigel on his war-horse, and the priest on the mule, clattered down the rude winding road which led to London. The country on either side was a wilderness of heather moors and of morasses, from which came the strange crying of nightfowl. A half-moon shone in the sky between the rifts of hurrying clouds. The lady rode in silence, absorbed in the thought of the task before them, the danger and the shame. From the shadow of the arched door there sprang 2 rough serving men, bearded and gruff, great cudgels in their hands, to ask them who they were and what their errand. The Lady Mary had slipped from her horse and was advancing to the door, but they rudely barred her way. "Nay, nay, our master needs no more," cried one, with a hoarse laugh. "Stand back, mistress, whoever you be. The house is shut, and our lord sees no guest tonight." "Fellow," said Nigel, speaking low and clear, "stand back from us. Our errand is with your master." "Bethink you, my children," cried the old priest, "would it not be best perchance that I go into him and see whether the voice of the church may not soften his hard heart? I fear bloodshed if you enter." "Nay, father, I pray you to stay here for the nonce," said Nigel. "And you, Mary, do you bide with the good priest, for we know not what may be within." Again he turned to the door, and again the two men barred his passage. "Stand back, I say, back for your lives," said Nigel. "By St. Paul, I should think it shame to soil my sword with such as you, but my soul is set, and no man shall bar my path this night." The men shrank from the deadly menace of that gentle voice. "Hold," said one of them, peering through the darkness. "Is it not Squire Loring of Tilford?" "That is indeed my name." But already Nigel was past them and had pushed open the outer door. Swift as he was, the Lady Mary was at his very heels, and the two passed together into the hall beyond. It was a great room, draped and curtained with black shadows, with one vivid circle of light in the center, where two oil lamps shone upon a small table. A meal was laid upon the table, but only two were seated at it, and there were no servants in the room. At the near end was Edith, her golden hair loose and streaming down over the scarlet and black of a riding dress. At the farther end the light beat strongly upon the harsh face and the high-drawn, misshapen shoulders of the lord of the house. A tangle of black hair surmounted a high, rounded forehead, the forehead of a thinker, with two deep-set cold grey eyes twinkling sharply from under tufted brows. His nose was curved and sharp, like the beak of some cruel bird, but below the whole of his clean-shaven, powerful face was marred by the loose slabbing mouth and the round folds of the heavy chin. His knife in one hand and a half-gnawed bone in the other, he looked fiercely up, like some beast disturbed in his den, as the two intruders broke in upon his hall. Nigel stopped midway between the door and the table. His eyes and those of Paul de la Fosse were riveted upon each other. But Mary, with her woman's soul flooded over with love and pity, had rushed forward and cast her arms round her younger sister. Edith had sprung up from a chair, and with averted face tried to push the other away from her. But Mary still held her in her arms, and still strove to soften the hard and angry heart. "Our mother is dead, Edith. I thank God that she died as she saw you under this roof. But I stand for her, as I have done all my life, since I'm indeed your elder. It is with her voice that I beg and pray you that you will not trust this man further, and that you will come back ere it be too late." Edith writhed from her grasp, and stood flushed and defiant, with gleaming, angry eyes fixed upon her sister. "You may speak evil of him now," said she, "but there was a time when Paul de la Fosse came to Cosford, and you so gentle and soft-spoken to him then as wise, grave, Sister Mary, but he has learned to love another. So now he is a wicked man, and it is shame to be seen under his roof. From what I see of my good pious sister and a cavalier, it is sin for another to ride at night with a man at your side, but it comes easy enough to you. Look at your own eye, good sister, ere you would take the speck from that of another." Mary stood irresolute and greatly troubled, holding down her pride and her anger, but uncertain how best to deal with his strong wayward spirit. "It is not a time for bitter words, dear sister," said she, and again she laid her hand upon her sister's sleeve. "All that you say may be true. There was indeed a time when this man was friend to us both, and I know even as you do the power which he may have to win a woman's heart. But I know him now, and you do not. I know the evil that he has wrought, the dishonor that he has brought, the perjury that lies upon his soul, the confidence betrayed, the promise unfulfilled. All this I know. Am I to see my own sister caught in the same well-used trap? Has it shut upon you, child? Am I indeed already too late? For God's sake, tell me, Edith, that it is not so." Edith plucked her sleeve from her sister, and made 2 swift steps to the head of the table. Paul de la Fosse still sat silent with his eyes upon Nigel. Edith laid her hand upon his shoulder. This is the man I love, and the only man that I have ever loved. This is my husband, said she. At the word, Mary gave a cry of joy. And is it so? She cried. Nay, then all is in honor, and God will see to the rest. If you are man and wife before the altar, then indeed why should I, or any other, stand between you? Tell me that it is indeed so, and I return this moment to make your father a happy man. Edith pouted like a naughty child. We are man and wife in the eyes of God. Soon also we shall be wedded before all the world. We do but wait until next Monday when Paul's brother, who is a priest at St. Albans, will come to wed us. Already a messenger has sped for him, and he will come, will he not, dear love? He will come, said the master of Shalford, still with his eyes fixed upon the silent Nigel. It is a lie. He will not come, said a voice from the door. It was the old priest, who had followed the others as far as the threshold. He will not come, he repeated as he advanced into the room. Daughter, my daughter, hearken to the words of one who is indeed old enough to be your earthly father. This lie has served before. He has ruined others before you with it. The man has no brother at St. Albans. I know his brothers well, and there is no priest among them. Before Monday, when it is all too late, you will have found the truth as others have done before you. Trust him not, but come with us. Paul de Lafosse looked up at her with a quick smile and patted the hand upon his shoulder. Do you speak to them, Edith? Said he. Her eyes flashed with scorn as she surveyed them each in turn, the woman, the youth, and the priest. I have but one word to say to them, said she. It is that they go hence and trouble us no more. Am I not a free woman? Have I not said that this is the only man I ever loved? I have loved him long. He did not know it, and in despair he turned to another. Now he knows all, and never again can doubt come between us. Therefore I will stay here at Shalford, and come to Cosford no more save upon the arm of my husband. Am I so weak that I would believe the tales you tell against him? Is it hard for a jealous woman and a wandering priest to agree upon a lie? No, no. Mary, you can go hence and take your cavalier and your priest with you. For here I stay, true to my love and safe in my trust upon his honor. Well spoken. On my faith, my golden bird, said the little master of Shalford. Let me add my own word to that which has been said. You would not grant me any virtue in your unkindly speech, good Lady Mary, and yet you must needs confess that at least I have good store of patience, since I have not set my dogs upon your friends who have come between me and my ease. But even to the most virtuous there comes at last a time when poor human frailty may prevail, and so I pray you to remove both yourself, your priest, and your valiant knight-errant, lest perhaps there be more haste and less dignity when at last you do take your leave. Sit down, my fair love, and let us turn once more to our supper. He motioned her to a chair, and he filled her wine cup as well as his own. Nigel had said no word since he had entered the room, but his look had never lost its set purpose, nor had his brooding eyes ever wandered from the sneering face of the deformed master of Shalford. Now he turned with swift decision to Mary and to the priest. That is over, said he in a low voice. You have done all that you could, and now it is for me to play my part as well as I am able. I pray you, Mary, and you, good father, that you will await me outside. Nay, Nigel, if there is danger. It is easier for me, Mary, if you are not there. I pray you to go. I can speak to this man more at my ease. She looked at him with questioning eyes and then obeyed. Nigel plucked at the priest's gown. I pray you, father, have you a book of offices with you? Surely, Nigel, it is ever in my breast. Have it ready, father. For what, my son? There are two places you may mark. There is the service of marriage, and there is the prayer for the dying. Go with her, father, and be ready at my call. He closed the door behind them and was alone with this ill-matched couple. They both turned in their chairs to look at him, Edith with a defiant face, the man with a bitter smile upon his lips and malignant hatred in his eyes. What, said he, the knight-errant still lingers. Have we not heard of his thirst for glory? What new venture does he see that he should tarry here? Nigel walked to the table. If you have ease, you have heard it. You are, as you have said, a free woman, and who can gainsay you? But I have known you, Edith, since we played as boy and girl on the heather hills together, I will save you from this man's cunning and from your own foolish weakness. What would you do? There is a priest without. He will marry you now. I will see you married ere I leave this hole. Or else, sneered the man. Edith was on her feet with outstretched arms between them. Stand back, Nigel. He is small and weak. You would not do him a hurt. Did you not say so this very day? For God's sake, Nigel, do not look at him so. There is death in your eyes. A snake may be small and weak, Edith, yet every honest man would place his heel upon it. Do you stand back yourself, for my purpose is set. He had risen from his chair, and he dashed aside her appealing hands. You foolish woman, he snarled. And you, my saviour of fair damsels, who are so bold against a cripple, you are both to learn that if my body be weak, there is the soul of my breed within it. To marry because of boasting, ranting, country squire would have me do so. No, by the soul of God, I will die first. On Monday I will marry, and no day sooner, so let that be your answer. Take this sword, said Nigel, and he turned the hilt to the cripple. Now, he added, as he drew his hunting knife, kill me if you can, Paul de Lafos, for as God is my help, I will do as much for you. The crash of the fall and the sharp point upon his throat had cowed the man's spirit. He looked up with a white face, and the sweat gleamed upon his forehead. There was terror in his eyes. Nay, take your knife from me, he cried. I cannot die like a calf in the shambles. Will you marry? Yes, I will wed her. After all, she is a good wench, and I might do worse. Let me up. I tell you I will marry her. What more would you have? The old priest ran to the cry, and so did the Lady Mary. A strange sight it was that met them now in the circle of light. The frightened girl, half unconscious against the table, the prostrate cripple, and Nigel with foot and sword upon his body. Your book, father, cried Nigel. I know not if what we do is good or ill, but we must wed them, for there is no way out. But the girl by the table had given a great cry, and she was clinging and sobbing with her arms round her sister's neck. Oh, Mary, I thank the Virgin that you have come. I thank the Virgin that it is not too late. What did he say? He said that he was a de Lafos, and that he would not be married at the sword point. My heart went out to him when he said it. But am I not a Butethorn? And shall it be said that I would marry a man who could be led to the altar with a knife at his throat? No, I see him as he is. I know him now, the mean spirit, the lying tongue. Can I not read in his eyes that he has indeed deceived me, that he would have left me as you say that he has left others? Take me home, Mary, my sister, for you have plucked me back this night from the very mouth of hell. And so it was that the master of Shalford, livid and brooding, was left with his wine at his lonely table, while the golden beauty of Cosford, hot with shame and anger, her fair face wet with tears, passed out safe from a house of infamy into the great calm and peace of the starry night. And now the season of the moonless nights was drawing nigh, and the king's design was ripe. Very secretly his preparations were made. Already the garrison of Calais, which consisted of 500 archers and 200 men-at-arms, could, if forewarned, resist any attack made upon it. But it was the king's design not merely to resist the attack, but to capture the attackers. Above all, it was his wish to find the occasion for one of those adventurous passages of arms which had made his name famous throughout Christendom as the very pattern and leader of knight-errant chivalry. Nigel had received word from Chandos to join him at the sign of the Broompod in Winchelsea. 3 days beforehand he and Aylward rode from Tilford all armed and ready for the wars. Nigel was in hunting costume, blithe and gay, with his precious armor and his small baggage trussed upon the back of a spare horse which Aylward led by the bridle. The archer had himself a good black mare, heavy and slow, but strong enough to be fit to carry his powerful frame. In his brigandine of chain mail and his steel cap, with straight, strong sword by his side, his yellow longbow jutting over his shoulder, and his quiver of arrows supported by a scarlet baldric, he was such a warrior as any knight might well be proud to have in his train. Old Tilford trailed behind them, as they rode slowly over the long slope of heathland which skirts the flank of Crooksbury Hill. At the summit of the rise, Nigel reined in Pommers and looked back at the little village behind him. There was the old dark manor house, with one bent figure leaning upon a stick and gazing dimly after him from beside the door. He looked at the high-pitched roof, the timbered walls, the long trail of swirling blue smoke which rose from a single chimney, and the group of downcast old servants who lingered at the gate, John the cook, Weathercoat the minstrel, and Red Swire the broken soldier. Over the river amid the trees he could see the grim, grey tower of Waverley, and even as he looked, the iron bell, which had so often seemed to be the hoarse-threatening cry of an enemy, clanged out its call to prayer. Nigel doffed his velvet cap and prayed also, prayed that peace might remain at home, and good warfare, in which honour and fame should await him, might still be found abroad. Then, waving his hand to the people, he turned his horse's head and rode slowly eastward. A moment later, Aylward broke from the group of archers and laughing girls who clung to his bridle and his stirrup straps and rode on, blowing kisses over his shoulder. So at last the two comrades, gentle and simple, were fairly started on their venture. There are two seasons of colour in those parts. The yellow, when the countryside is flaming with the gorse blossoms, and the crimson, when all the long slopes are smouldering with the heather. So it was now. Nigel looked back from time to time, as he rode along the narrow track where the ferns and the ling brushed his feet on either side, and as he looked it seemed to him that wander way might he would never see a fairer scene than that of his own home. Far to the westward, glowing in the morning light, rolled billow after billow of ruddy heatherland, until they merged into the dark shadows of Woolmer Forest and the pale clear green of the Butser Chalk Downs. Never in his life had Nigel wandered far beyond these limits, and the woodlands, the down and the heather were dear to his soul. It gave him a pang in his heart now as he turned his face away from them. But if home lay to the westward, out there to the eastward was the great world of adventure, the noble stage where each of his kinsmen in turn had played his manly part and left a proud name behind. How often he had longed for this day, and now it had come with no shadow cast behind it. Dame Ermintrude was under the king's protection. The old servants had their future assured. The strife with the monks of Waverley had been assuaged. He had a noble horse under him, the best of weapons, and a stout follower at his back. Above all, he was bound on a gallant errand with the bravest knight in England as his leader. All these thoughts surged together in his mind, and he whistled and sang, as he rode, out of the joy of his heart, while Pommers sidled and coveted in sympathy with the mood of his master. Presently, glancing back, he saw from Aylward's downcast eyes and puckered brow that the archer was clouded with trouble. He reined his horse to let him come abreast of him. Aylward shrugged his broad shoulders, and a wry smile dawned upon his rugged face. "I am indeed as limp as a wetted bowstring," said he. "It is the nature of a man that he should be sad when he leaves the woman he loves." "In truth, yes," cried Nigel, and in a flash the dark eyes of Mary Butestone rose before him, and he heard her low, sweet, earnest voice as he had heard that night when they brought her frailer sister back from Shalford Manor, a voice which made all that was best and noblest in a man thrill within his soul. "Yet, bethink you, archer, that what a woman loves in man is not his gross body, but rather his soul, his honour, his fame, the deeds with which he has made his life beautiful. Therefore you are winning love as well as glory when you turn to the wars." "It may be so," said Aylward, "but indeed it goes to my heart to see the pretty dears weep, and I would fain weep as well to keep them company. When Mary, or was it Dolly? Nay, it was Martha, the red-headed girl from the mill, when she held tight to my baldric, it was like snapping my heartstring to pluck myself loose." "You speak of one name and then of another," said Nigel. "How is she called then, this maid whom you love?" Aylward pushed back his steel cap and scratched his bristling head with some embarrassment. "Her name," said he, "is Mary Dolly Martha Susan Jane Cicely Theodosia Agnes Joanna Kate." Nigel laughed as Aylward rolled out this prodigious title. "I had no right to take you to the wars," said he, "for by St. Paul, it is very clear that I have widowed half the parish. But I saw your age father the Franklin. Bethink you of the joy that will fill his heart when he hears that you have done some small deed in France, and so won honour in the eyes of all. I fear that honour will not help him to pay his arrears of rent to the sacrist of Waverley, said Aylward. Out he will go on the roadside, honour and all, if he does not find 10 nobles by next Epiphany. But if I could win a ransom or be at the storming of a rich city, then indeed the old man would be proud of me. Thy sword must help my spade. Samkin, said he as he kissed me goodbye. Ah, it would indeed be a happy day for him and for all if I could ride back with a saddlebag full of gold pieces. And please God, I shall dip my hand in somebody's pocket before I see Crooksbury Hill once more. Nigel shook his head, for indeed it seemed hopeless to try to bridge the gulf between them. Already they had made such good progress along the bridle path through the heather that the little hill of St. Catherine and the ancient shrine upon its summit loomed up before them. Here they crossed the road from the south to London, and at the crossing 2 wayfarers were waiting who waved their hands in greeting, the one a tall, slender, dark woman upon a white jennet, the other a very thick and red-faced old man, whose weight seemed to curve the back of the stout grey cob which he bestrode. "What how, Nigel?" he cried. "Mary has told me that you make a start this morning, and we have waited here this hour and more on the chance of seeing you pass. Come, lad, and have a last stoup of English ale, for many a time amid the sour French wines you will long for the white foam under your nose and the good homely twang of it." Nigel had to decline the draught, for it meant riding into Guildford town, a mile out of his course, but very gladly he agreed with Mary that they should climb the path to the old shrine and offer a last orison together. The knight and Aylward waited below with the horses, and so it came about that Nigel and Mary found themselves alone under the solemn old Gothic arches, in front of the dark shadowed recess in which gleamed the golden reliquary of the saint. In silence they knelt side by side in prayer, and then came forth once more out of the gloom and the shadow into the fresh sunlit summer morning. They stopped ere they descended the path, and looked to right and left at the fair meadows and the blue weed curling down the valley. "What have you prayed for, Nigel?" said she. "I have prayed that God and his saints will hold my spirit high, and will send me back from France in such a fashion that I may dare to come to you and to claim you for my own." "Bethink you well what it is that you say, Nigel," said she. "What you are to me only my own heart can tell. But I would never set eyes upon your face again rather than abate by 1 inch that height of honour and worshipful achievement to which you may attain." "Nay, my dear and most sweet lady, how should you abate it, since it is a thought of you which will nerve my arm and uphold my heart? Think once more, my fair lord, and hold yourself bound by no word which you have said. Let it be as the breeze which blows past our faces and is heard of no more. Your soul yearns for honour. To that has it ever turned. Is there room in it for love also? Or is it possible that both shall live at their highest in one mind? Do you not call to mind that Galahad and other great knights of old have put women out of their lives that they might ever give their whole soul and strength to the winning of honour? May it not be that I shall be a drag upon you, that your heart may shrink from some honourable task, lest it should bring risk and pain to me? Think well before you answer, my fair lord, for indeed my very heart would break if it should ever happen that through love of me your high hopes and great promise should miss fulfilment." Nigel looked at her with sparkling eyes. The soul which shone through her dark face had transformed it for the moment into a beauty more lofty, and more rare than that of her shallow sister. He bowed before the majesty of the woman, and pressed his lips to her hand. "You are like a star upon my path which guides me on the upward way," said he. "Our souls are set together upon the finding of honour, and how shall we hold each other back when our purpose is the same?" She shook her proud head. "So it seems to you now, fair lord, but it may be otherwise as the years pass. How shall you prove that I am indeed a help and not a hindrance?" "I will prove it by my deeds, fair and dear lady," said Nigel. "Here at the shrine of the Holy Catherine, on this, the feast of St. Margaret, I take my oath that I will do 3 deeds in your honour as a proof of my high love before I set eyes upon your face again, and these 3 deeds shall stand as a proof to you that if I love you dearly, still I will not let the thought of you stand betwixt me and honourable achievement." Her face shone with her love and her pride. "I also make my oath," said she, "and I do it in the name of the Holy Catherine whose shrine is hard by. I swear that I will hold myself for you until these 3 deeds be done and we meet once more. Also that if, which may dare Christ forfend, you fall in doing them, then I shall take the veil in Shalford nunnery and look upon no man's face again. Give me your hand, Nigel." She had taken a little bangle of gold filigree work from her arm and fastened it upon his sunburnt wrist, reading aloud to him the engraved motto in Old French: Fais que dois, advienne que pourra, c'est command au chevalier. Then for one moment they fell into each other's arms, and with kiss upon kiss, a loving man and a tender woman, they swore their troth to each other. But the old knight was calling impatiently from below, and together they hurried down the winding path to where the horses waited under the sandy bluff. As far as the Shalford crossing, Sir John rode by Nigel's arm, and many were the last injunctions which he gave him concerning woodcraft, and great his anxiety lest he confuse a spade with a brocket, or either with a hind. At last, when they came to the reedy edge of the weed, the old knight and his daughter reined up their horses. Nigel looked back at them ere he entered the dark chantry woods, and saw them still gazing after him and waving their hands. Then the path wound amongst the trees, and they were lost to sight. But long afterwards, when a clearing exposed once more the Shalford meadows, Nigel saw that the old man upon the grey cob was riding slowly towards St. Catherine's Hill, but that the girl was still where he had seen her last, leaning forward in her saddle and straining her eyes to pierce the dark forest which screened her lover from her view. It was but a fleeting glance through a break in the foliage, and yet in after days of stress and toil in far distant lands it was that one little picture: the green meadow, the reeds, the slow blue winding river, and the eager bending graceful figure upon the white horse, which was the clearest and the dearest image of that England which he had left behind him. But if Nigel's friends had learned that this was the morning of his leaving, his enemies too were on the alert. The two comrades had just emerged from the Chantry woods and were beginning the ascent of that curving path which leads upward to the old chapel of the Mater, when with a hiss like an angry snake, a long white arrow streaked under pommers and struck quivering in the grassy turf. A second whizzed past Nigel's ear as he tried to turn, but Aylward struck the great war horse a sharp blow over the haunches, and it had galloped some hundreds of yards before its rider could pull it up. Aylward followed as hard as he could ride, bending low over his horse's neck, while arrows whizzed all around him. "By St. Paul," said Nigel, tugging at his bridle and white with anger, "they shall not chase me across the country as though I was a frighted doe. Archer, how dare you to lash my horse when I would have turned and ridden in upon them?" "It is well that I did so," said Aylward, "or by these 10 finger bones, our journey would have begun and ended on the same day." As I glanced round, I saw a dozen of them, at the least amongst the brushwood. "See now how the light glimmers upon their steel caps yonder in the bracken under the great beech tree. Nay, I pray you, my fair lord, do not ride forward. What chance has a man in the open against all these who lie at their ease in the underwood? If you will not think of yourself, then consider your horse, which would have a cloth-yard shaft feathered in its hide ere it could reach the wood." Nigel chafed in impotent anger. "Am I to be shot at like a popinjay at a fay by any reaver or outlaw that seeks a mark for his bow?" he cried. "By St. Paul, Aylward, I will put on my harness and go further into the matter. Help me to untruss, I pray you." "Nay, my fair lord, I will not help you to your own downfall. It is a match with carved dice betwixt a horseman on the moor and archers amid the forest. But these men are no outlaws, or they would not dare to draw their bows within a league of the Sheriff of Guildford." "Indeed, Aylward, I think that you speak truth," said Nigel. "It may be that these are the men of Paul de la Fosse of Shalford, whom I have given little cause to love me. Ah, there is indeed the very man himself." They set their horses with their backs to the long slope, which leads up to the old chapel on the hill. In front of them was the dark, ragged edge of the wood, with a sharp twinkle of steel here and there in its shadows which spoke of these lurking foes. But now there was a long moot upon a horn, and at once a score of russet-clad bowmen ran forward from amid the trees, spreading out into a scattered line and closing swiftly in upon the travellers. In the midst of them, upon a great grey horse, sat a small misshapen man, waving and cheering as one sets hounds on a badger, turning his head this way and that as he whooped and pointed, urging his bowmen onward up the slope. "Draw them on, my fair lord, draw them on until we have them out on the down," cried Aylward, his eyes shining with joy. 500 paces more, and then we may be on terms with them. Nay, linger not, but keep them always just clear of arrow shot until our turn has come." Nigel shook and trembled with eagerness, as with his hand on his sword hilt he looked at the line of eager hurrying men. But it flashed through his mind what Chandos had said of the cool head, which is better for the warrior than the hot heart. Aylward's words were true and wise. He turned Pomer's head, therefore, and amid a cry of derision from behind them, the comrades trotted over the down. The bowmen broke into a run, while their leader screamed and waved more madly than before. Aylward cast many a glance at them over his shoulder. Yet a little farther still, he muttered. The wind is towards them, and the fools have forgot that I can overshoot them by 50 paces. Now, my good lord, I pray you for one instant to hold the horses, for my weapon is of more avail this day than thine can be. They may make sorry cheer ere they gain the shelter of the wood once more. He had sprung from his horse, and with a downward wrench of his arm and a push with his knee slipped the string into the upper nock of his mighty warbow. Then in a flash he notched his shaft and drew it to the pile, his keen blue eyes glowing fiercely behind it from under his knotted brows. With thick legs planted sturdily apart, his body laid to the bow, his left arm motionless as wood, his right bunched into a double curve of swelling muscles as he stretched the white, well-waxed string. He looked so keen and fierce a fighter that the advancing line stopped for an instant at the sight of him. 2 or 3 loosed off their arrows, but the shafts flew heavily against the headwind, and snaked along the hard turf some score paces short of the mark. One only, a short bandy-legged man, whose squat figure spoke of enormous muscular strength, ran swiftly in and then drew so strong a bow that the arrow quivered in the ground at Aylward's very feet. "It is Black Will of Linchmere," said the bowman. "Many a match have I shot with him, and I know well that no other man on the Surrey marches could have spared such a shaft. I trust that you are houselled and shriven, Will, for I have known you so long that I would not have your damnation upon my soul." He raised his bow as he spoke, and the string twanged with a rich, deep musical note. Aylward leaned upon his bow-stave as he keenly watched the long, swift flight of his shaft, skimming smoothly down the wind. On him, no, over him, by my hilt, he cried. "There's more wind than I had thought. Nay, friend, now that I have the length of you, you can scarce hope to loose again." Black Will had notched an arrow and was raising his bow when Aylward's second shaft passed through the shoulder of his drawing arm. With a shout of anger and pain he dropped his weapon, and dancing in his fury he shook his fist and roared curses at his rival. "I could slay him, but I will not, for good bowmen are not so common," said Aylward. "And now, fair sir, we must on, for they are spreading round on either side, and if once they get behind us, then indeed our journey has come to a sudden end. But ere we go, I would send a shaft through yonder horseman who leads them on." "Nay, Aylward, I pray you to leave him," said Nigel. "Villain as he is none the less a gentleman of coat armour, and should die by some other weapon than thine." "As you will," said Aylward with a clouded brow. "I have been told that in the late wars many a French prince and baron has not been too proud to take his death wound from an English yeoman's shaft, and that nobles of England have been glad enough to stand by and see it done." Nigel shook his head sadly. "It is sooth you say, Archer, and indeed it is no new thing, for that good knight Richard of the Lion Heart met his end in such a lowly fashion, and so also did Harold the Saxon. But this is a private matter, and I would not have you draw your bow against him. Neither can I ride at him myself, for he is weak in body, though dangerous in spirit. Therefore, we will go upon our way, since there is neither profit nor honour to be gained, nor any hope of advancement." Aylward, having unstrung his bow, had remounted his horse during this conversation, and the two rode swiftly past the little squat chapel of the Martyr and over the brow of the hill. From the summit they looked back. The injured archer lay upon the ground, with several of his comrades gathered in a knot around him. Others ran aimlessly up the hill, but were already far behind. The leader sat motionless upon his horse, and as he saw them look back, he raised his hand and shrieked his curses at them. An instant later the curve of the ground had hid them from view. So, amid love and hate, Nigel bade adieu to the home of his youth. And now the comrades were journeying upon that old road which runs across the south of England and yet never turns toward London, for the good reason that the place was a poor hamlet when first the road was laid. From Winchester, the Saxon capital, to Canterbury, the holy city of Kent, ran that ancient highway, and on from Canterbury to the narrow straits where, on a clear day, the farther shore can be seen. Along this track as far back as history can trace the metals of the West are being carried, and past the pack horses which bore the goods which Gaul sent in exchange. Older than the Christian faith and older than the Romans is the Old Road. North and south are the woods and the marshes, so that only on the high dry turf of the chalk land could a clear track be found. The Pilgrim's Way. It still is called. But the Pilgrims were the last who ever trod it, for it was already of immemorial age before the death of Thomas à Becket gave a new reason why folks should journey to the scene of his murder. From the hill of Weston, would the travellers could see the long white band which dipped and curved and rose over the green downland, its course marked even in the hollows by the line of the old yew trees which flanked it. Neither Nigel nor Aylward had wandered far from their own country, and now they rode with light hearts and eager eyes, taking note of all the varied pictures of nature and of man which passed before them. To their left was a hilly country, a land of rolling heaths and woods, broken here and there into open spaces round the occasional farmhouse of a franklin. Hackhurst Down, Dunley Hill, and Ranmore Common swelled and sank, each merging into the other. But on the right, after passing the village of Shear and the old church of Gomshaw, the whole south country lay like a map at their feet. There was a huge wood of the Weald, one unbroken forest of oak trees stretching away to the South Downs, which rose olive-green against the deep blue sky. Under this great canopy of trees, strange folk lived and evil deeds were done. In its recesses were wild tribes, little changed from their heathen ancestors, who danced round the altar of Thor, and well was it for the peaceful traveller that he could tread the high open road of the chalk land with no need to wander into so dangerous a tract where soft clay, tangled forest, and wild men all barred his progress. But apart from the rolling country upon the left and the great forest-hidden plain upon the right, there was much upon the road itself to engage the attention of the wayfarers. It was crowded with people. As far as their eyes could carry, they could see the black dots scattered thickly upon the thin white band, sometimes single, sometimes several abreast, sometimes in moving crowds, where a drove of pilgrims held together for mutual protection, or a nobleman showed his greatness by the number of retainers who trailed at his heels. At that time the main roads were very crowded, for there were many wandering people in the land, of all sorts and kinds. They passed in an unbroken stream before the eyes of Nigel and of Aylward, alike only in the fact that one and all were powdered from their hair to their shoes with the grey dust of the chalk. There were monks journeying from one cell to another, Benedictines with their black gowns looped up to show their white skirts, Carthusians in white, and pied Cistercians. Friars also of the three wandering orders, Dominicans in black, Carmelites in white, and Franciscans in grey. There was no love lost between the cloistered monks and the free friars, each looking on the other as a rival who took from him the oblations of the faithful. So they passed on the high road as cat passes dog, with eyes askance and angry faces. Then besides the men of the church, there were the men of trade, the merchant in dusty broadcloth and Flanders hat riding at the head of his line of pack horses. He carried Cornish tin, Welt country wool, or Sussex iron if he traded eastward, or if his head should be turned westward, then he bore with him the velvets of Genoa, the ware of Venice, the wine of France, or the armor of Italy and Spain. Pilgrims were everywhere, poor people for the most part, plodding wearily along with trailing feet and bowed heads, thick staves in their hands and bundles over their shoulders. Here and there on a gaily caparisoned palfrey, or in the greater luxury of a horse litter, some West Country lady might be seen making her easy way to the shrine of St. Thomas. Besides all these, a constant stream of strange vagabonds drifted along the road, minstrels who wandered from fair to fair, a foul and pestilent crew, jugglers and acrobats, quack doctors and tooth-drawers, students and beggars, free workmen in search of better wages, and escaped bondsmen who would welcome any wages at all. Such was the throng which set the old road smoking in a haze of white dust from Winchester to the narrow sea. But of all the wayfarers, those which interested Nigel most were the soldiers. Several times they passed little knots of archers or men-at-arms, veterans from France, who had received their discharge and were now making their way to their Southland homes. They were half drunk, all of them, for the wayfarers treated them to beer at the frequent inns and ale stakes which lined the road, so that they cheered and sang lustily as they passed. They roared rude pleasantries at Aylward, who turned in his saddle and shouted his opinion of them until they were out of hearing. Once, late in the afternoon, they overtook a body of 100 archers all marching together with 2 knights riding at their head. They were passing from Guildford Castle to Reigate Castle, where they were in garrison. Nigel rode with the knights for some distance, and hinted that if either was in search of honourable advancement, or wished to do some small deed, or to relieve himself of any vow, it might be possible to find some means of achieving it. They were both, however, grave and elderly men, intent upon their business and with no mind for fond wayside adventures, so Nigel quickened his pace and left them behind. They had left Boxhill and Headley Heath upon the left, and the towers of Reigate were rising amid the trees in front of them, when they overtook a large, cheery, red-faced man, with a forked beard, riding upon a good horse and exchanging a nod or a merry word with all who pass him. With him they rode nearly as far as Bletchingley, and Nigel laughed much to hear him talk, but always under the raillery there was much earnestness and much wisdom in all his words. He rode at his ease about the country, he said, having sufficient money to keep him from want and to furnish him for the road. He could speak all the 3 languages of England, the North, the Middle, and the South, so that he was at home with the people of every shire and could hear their troubles and their joys. In all parts in town and in country there was unrest, he said, for the poor folk were weary of their masters both of the church and state, and soon there would be such doings in England as had never been seen before. But above all this man was earnest against the church, its enormous wealth, its possession of nearly 1/3 of the whole land of the country, its insatiable greed for more at the very time when it claimed to be poor and lowly. The monks and friars, too, he lashed with his tongue, their roguish ways, their laziness and their cunning. He showed how their wealth and that of the haughty lord must always be founded upon the toil of poor humble Peter the ploughman, who worked and strove in rain and cold out in the fields, the butt and laughing stock of everyone, and still bearing up the whole world upon his weary shoulders. He had set it all out in a fair parable, so now as he rode he repeated some of the verses, chanting them and marking time with his forefinger, while Nigel and Aylward on either side of him with their heads inclined inward listened with the same attention, but with very different feelings, Nigel shocked at such an attack upon authority, and Aylward chuckling as he heard the sentiments of his class so shrewdly expressed. At last the stranger halted his horse outside the 5 Angels at Gatton. "It is a good inn, and I know the ale of old," said he. "When I had finished that dream of Piers the ploughman, from which I have recited to you, the last verses were thus: Now have I brought my little book to an end, God's blessing be on him who would drink will me send day. I pray you come in with me and share it." "Nay," said Nigel, "we must on our way, for we have far to go. But give me your name, my friend, for indeed we have passed a merry hour listening to your words." "Have a K," the stranger answered, shaking his head. "You and your class will not spend a merry hour when these words are turned into deeds, and Peter the ploughman grows weary of swinking in the fields and takes up his bow and his staff in order to set this land in order. By St. Paul, I expect that we shall bring Peter to reason, and also those who have put such evil thoughts into his head," said Nigel. "So once more I ask your name, that I may know it if ever I chance to hear that you have been hanged." The stranger laughed good-humouredly. "You can call me Thomas Lackland," said he. "I should be Thomas Lackbrain if I were indeed to give my true name, since a good many robbers, some in black gowns and some in steel, will be glad to help me upwards in the way you speak of. So good day to you, squire, and to you also, archer, and may you find your way back with whole bone from the wars." That night the comrades slept in Godson Priory, and early next morning they were well upon their road down the Pilgrim's Way. At Titsey it was said that a band of villains were out in Westerham Wood, and had murdered 3 men the day before, so that Nigel had high hopes of an encounter, but the brigands showed no sign, though the travellers went out of their way to ride their horses along the edges of the forest. Farther on they found traces of their work, for the path ran along the hillside at the base of a chalk quarry, and there in the cutting a man was lying dead. From his twisted limbs and shattered frame, it was easy to see that he had been thrown over from above, while his pockets turned outward showed the reason for his murder. The comrades rode past without too close a survey, for dead men were no very uncommon objects on the King's highway, and if sheriff or bailiff should chance upon you near the body, you might find yourself caught in the meshes of the law. Near Sevenoaks, their road turned out of the old Canterbury way and pointed south toward the coast, leaving the chalk lands and coming down into the clay of the Weald. It was a wretched, rutted mule track running through thick forests with occasional clearings in which lay the small Kentish villages, where rude shock-headed peasants with smocks and galligaskins stared with bold, greedy eyes at the travellers. Once on the right they caught a distant view of the towers of Penshurst, and once they heard the deep tolling of the bells of Bayham Abbey. But for the rest of their day's journey savage peasants and squalid cottages were all that met their eyes, with endless droves of pigs who fed upon the litter of acorns. The throng of travellers who crowded the old road were all gone, and only here and there did they meet or overtake some occasional merchant or messenger bound for Battle Abbey, Pevensey Castle, or the towns of the south. That night they slept in a sordid inn, overrun with rats and with fleas, 1 mile south of the hamlet of Mayfield. Aylward scratched vigorously and cursed with fervour. Nigel lay without movement or sound. To the man who had learned the old rule of chivalry, there were no small ills in life. It was beneath the dignity of his soul to stoop to observe them. Cold and heat, hunger and thirst, such things did not exist for the gentleman. The armour of his soul was so complete that it was proof not only against the great ills of life, but even against the small ones. So the flea-bitten Nigel lay grimly still, while Aylward writhed upon his couch. They were now but a short distance from their destination, but they had hardly started on their journey through the forest next morning, when an adventure befell them which filled Nigel with the wildest hopes. Along the narrow winding path between the great oak trees there rode a dark cellar-man in a scarlet tabard who blew so loudly upon a silver trumpet that they heard the clanging call long before they set eyes on him. Slowly he advanced, pulling up every 50 paces to make the forest ring with another warlike blast. The comrades rode forward to meet him. "I pray you," said Nigel, "to tell me who you are and why you blow upon this trumpet." The fellow shook his head. So Nigel repeated the question in French, the common language of chivalry, spoken at that age by every gentleman in Western Europe. The man put his lips to the trumpet and blew another long note before he answered. "I'm Gaston de Castries," said he, "the humble squire of the most worthy and valiant knight Raoul de Tubius, de Pestel's, de Grimsard, de Mersac, de Lioy, de Bastonac, who also writes himself Lord of Paunce. It is his order that I ride always a mile in front of him to prepare or to receive him, and he desires me to blow upon a trumpet not out of vainglory, but out of greatness of spirit, so that none may be ignorant of his coming should they desire to encounter him." Nigel sprang from his horse with a cry of joy, and began to unbutton his doublet. "Quick, Aylward, quick," he said. "He comes. A knight-errant comes. Was there ever such a chance of worshipfully winning worship? Untruss the harness whilst I loose my clothes. Good sir, I beg you to warn your noble and valiant master that a poor squire of England would implore him to take notice of him, and to do some small deed upon him as he passes." But already the Lord of Paunce had come in sight. He was a huge man upon an enormous horse, so that together they seemed to fill up the whole long dark archway under the oaks. He was clad in full armour of a brazen hue, with only his face exposed, and of this face there was little visible save a pair of arrogant eyes and a great black beard, which flowed through the open visor and down over his breastplate. To the crest of his helmet was tied a small brown glove, nodding and swinging above him. He bore a long lance with a red square band at the end, charged with a black bull's head, and the same symbol was engraved upon his shield. Slowly he rode through the forest, ponderous, menacing, with dull thudding of his charger's hoofs and constant clank of metal, while always in front of him came the distant peal of the silver trumpet calling all men to admit his majesty and to clear his path that they be cleared from it. Never in his dreams had so perfect a vision come to cheer Nigel's heart, and as he struggled with his clothes, glancing up continually at this wondrous traveller, he pattered forth prayers of thanksgiving to the good St. Paul who had shown such loving kindness to his unworthy servant and thrown him in the path of so excellent and debonair a gentleman. But alas! How often at the last instant the cup is dashed from the lips. This joyful chance was destined to change suddenly to unexpected and grotesque disaster so strange and so complete that through all his life Nigel flushed crimson when he thought of it. He was busily stripping his hunting costume, and with feverish haste he had doffed boots, hat, hose, doublet, and cloak, so that nothing remained save a pink jupon and pair of silken drawers. At the same time Aylward was hastily unbuckling the load with the intention of handing his master his armour piece by piece, when the squire gave one last challenging peal from his silver trumpet into the very ear of the spare horse. In an instant it had taken to its heels, the precious armor upon its back, and thundered away down the road which they had traversed. Elwood jumped upon his mare, drove his prick spurs into her sides, and galloped after the runaway as hard as he could ride. Thus it came about that in an instant Nigel was shorn of all his little dignity, had lost his 2 horses, his attendant, and his outfit, and found himself a lonely and unarmed man standing in his shirt and drawers upon the pathway down which the burly figure of the Lord of Paunce was slowly advancing. The knight-errant, whose mind had been filled by the thought of the maiden whom he had left behind at St. Jean, the same whose glove dangled from his helmet, had observed nothing that had occurred. Hence, all that met his eyes was a noble yellow horse, which was tethered by the track, and a small young man, who appeared to be a lunatic since he had undressed hastily in the heart of the forest, and stood now with an eager, anxious face clad in his underlinen amid the scattered debris of his garments. Of such a person the High Lord of Paunce could take no notice, and so he pursued his inexorable way, his arrogant eyes looking out into the distance, and his thoughts set intently upon the maiden of St. Jean. He was dimly aware that the little crazy man in the undershirt ran a long way beside him in his stockings, begging, imploring, and arguing. Just 1 hour, most fair sir, just 1 hour at the longest, and a poor squire of England shall ever hold himself your debtor. Do but condescend to rein your horse until my harness comes back to me. Will you not stoop to show me some small deed of arms? I implore you, fair sir, to spare me a little of your time and a hand-stroke or 2 ere you go upon your way. Lord de Paunce motioned impatiently with his gauntleted hand, as one might brush away an importunate fly. But when at last Nigel became desperate in his clamour, he thrust his spurs into his great war-horse, and clashing like a pair of cymbals he thundered off through the forest. So he rode upon his majestic way, until 2 days later he was slain by Lord Reginald Cobham in a field near Weybridge. When after a long chase Aylward secured the spare horse and brought it back, he found his master seated upon a fallen tree, his face buried in his hands, and his mind clouded with humiliation and grief. Nothing was said, for the matter was beyond words, and so in moody silence they rode upon their way. But soon they came upon a scene which drew Nigel's thoughts away from his bitter trouble, for in front of them there rose the towers of a great building with a small grey sloping village around it, and they learned from a passing hind that this was a hamlet and abbey of Battle. Together they drew rein upon the low ridge and looked down into that valley of death from which even now the reek of blood seems to rise. Down beside that sinister lake and amid those scattered bushes sprinkled over the naked flank of the long ridge was fought that long-drawn struggle betwixt 2 most noble foes who brought England as the prize of victory. Here, up and down the low hill, hour by hour the grim struggle had waxed and waned, until the Saxon army had died where it stood, king, court, housecarl, and herdsman, each in their ranks even as they had fought. And now, after all the stress and toil, the tyranny, the savage revolt, the fierce oppression, God had made his purpose complete. For here were Nigel the Norman and Aylward the Saxon with good fellowship in their hearts and a common respect in their minds, with the same banner and the same cause, riding forth to do battle for their old mother England. And now the long ride drew to an end. In front of them was the blue sea, flecked with the white sails of ships. Once more the road passed upward from the heavy wooded plain to the springy turf of the chalk downs. Far to the right rose a grim fortalice of Pevensey, squat and powerful, like one great block of rugged stone, the parapet twinkling with steel caps and crowned by the royal banner of England. A flat expanse of reeded marshland lay before them, out of which rose a single wooded hill, crowned with towers, with a bristle of moss rising out of the green plain some distance to the south of it. Nigel looked at it with his hand shading his eyes, and then urged Pommers to a trot. The town was Winchelsea, and there amid that cluster of houses on the hill the gallant Chandos must be awaiting him. Chapter 14. How Nigel Chased the Red Ferret. They pass a ferry, mound upward by a curving path, and then, having satisfied a guard of men-at-arms, were admitted through the frowning arch of the Pipwell Gate. There waiting for them, in the middle of the East Street, the sun gleaming upon his lemon-coloured beard, and puckering his single eye, stood Chandos himself, his legs apart, his hands behind his back, and a welcoming smile upon his quaint high-nosed face. Behind him a crowd of little boys were gazing with reverent eyes at the famous soldier. "Welcome, Nigel," said he, "and you also, good archer." I chanced to be walking on the city wall, and I thought from the colour of your horse that it was indeed you upon the Udimore road. How have you fared, young squire errant? Have you held bridges, or rescued damsels, or slain oppressors on your way from Tilford? Nay, my fair lord, I have accomplished nothing, but I once had hopes. Nigel flushed at the remembrance. I will give you more than hopes, Nigel. I will put you where you can dip both arms to the elbow into danger and honour, where peril will sleep with you at night and rise with you in the morning, and the very breed be laden with it. Are you ready for that, young sir? I can but pray, fair lord, that my spirit will rise to it. Chandos smiled his approval, and laid his thin brown hand on the youth's shoulder. Good, said he. It is the mute hound which bites the hardest. The babbler is ever the hangback. Bide with me here, Nigel, and walk upon the ramparts. Archer, do you lead the horses to the sign of the broom pod in the high street, and tell my varlets to see them aboard the cog Thomas before nightfall. We sail at the second hour after curfew. Come hither, Nigel, to the crest of the corner turret, for from it I will show you what you have never seen. It was but a dim and distant white cloud upon the blue water seen far off over the Dungeness point, and yet the sight of it flushed the young squire's cheeks and sent the blood hot through his veins. It was the fringe of France, that land of chivalry and glory, the stage where name and fame were to be won. With burning eyes he gazed across at it, his heart rejoicing to think that the hour was at hand when he might tread that sacred soil. Then his gaze crossed the immense stretch of the blue sea, dotted over with the sails of fishing boats, until it rested upon the double harbour beneath, packed with vessels of every size and shape, from the Pessiners and Crayers, which plied up and down the coast, to the great cogs and galleys which were used either as warships or merchantmen as the occasion served. One of them was at that instant passing out to sea, a huge galleass, with trumpets blowing and nakers banging, the flag of St. George flaunting over the broad purple sail, and the deck sparkling from end to end with steel. Nigel gave a cry of pleasure at the splendour of the sight. "Aye, lad," said Chandos, "it is the Trinity of Rye, the very ship on which I fought at Sluys. Her deck ran blood from stem to stern that day. But turn your eyes this way, I beg you, and tell me if you see aught strange about this town." Nigel looked down at the noble straight street, at the roundel tower, at the fine church of St. Thomas, and the other fair buildings of Winchelsea. "It is all new," said he, "church, castle, houses, all are new." "You are right, fair son. My grandfather can call to mind the time when only the cunnies lived upon this rock. The town was down yonder by the sea, until one night the waves rose upon it and not a house was left. See, yonder is Rye, huddling also on a hill, the two towns like poor sheep when the waters are out. But down there under the blue water and below the camber sand lies the true Winchelsea, tower, cathedral, walls, and all, even as my grandfather knew it, when the first Edward was young upon the throne." For an hour or more Chandos paced upon the ramparts with his young squire at his elbow and talked to him of his duties and of the secrets and craft of warfare, Nigel drinking in and storing in his memory every word from so revered a teacher. Many a time in afterlife, in stress and in danger, he strengthened himself by the memory of that slow walk with the blue sea on one side and the fair town on the other, when the wise soldier and noble-hearted knight poured forth his precept and advice as the master workman to the apprentice. "Perhaps, fair son," said he, "you are like so many other lads who ride to the wars, and know so much already that it is waste of breath to advise them. Nay, my fair lord, I know nothing save that I would fain do my duty and either win honourable advancement or die worshipful on the field." "You are wise to be humble," said Chandos, "for indeed he who knows most of war knows best that there is much to learn. As there is a mystery of the rivers and a mystery of woodcraft, even so there is a mystery of warfare by which battles may be lost and gained. For all nations are brave, and where the brave meets a brave, it is he who is crafty and war-wise who will win the day. The best hound will run at fault if he be ill laid on, and the best hawk will fly at check if he be badly loosed. And even so the bravest army may go awry if it be ill-handled. There are not in Christendom better knights and squires than those of the French, and yet we have had the better of them. For in our Scottish wars and elsewhere we have learned more of the same mystery of which I speak." "And wherein lies our wisdom, honoured sir?" asked Nigel. I also would fain be war-wise and learn to fight with my wits as well as with my sword. Chandos shook his head and smiled. It is in the forest and on the down that you learn to fly the hawk and loose the hound, said he. So also it is in camp and on the field that the mystery of war can be learned. There only has every great captain come to be its master. To start he must have a cool head, quick to think, soft as wax before his purpose is formed, hard as steel when once he sees it before him. Ever alert he must be, and cautious also, but with judgment to turn his caution into rashness where a large gain may be put against a small stake. An eye for country also, for the trend of the rivers, the slope of the hills, the cover of the woods, and the light green of the bogland. Poor Nigel, who had trusted to his lance and to pommers to break his path to glory, stood aghast at this list of needs. Alas, he cried, how am I to gain all this? I, who could scarce learn to read or write, though the good Father Matthew broke a hazel stick a day across my shoulders. You will gain it, fair son, where others have gained it before you. You have that which is the first thing of all, a heart of fire from which other colder hearts may catch a spark. But you must have knowledge also of that which warfare has taught us in olden times. We know, par example, that horsemen alone cannot hope to win against good foot soldiers. Has it not been tried at Courtrai, at Stirling, and again under my own eyes at Cressy, where the chivalry of France went down before our bowmen? Nigel stared at him with a perplexed brow. Fair sir, my heart grows heavy as I hear you. Do you then say that our chivalry can make no head against archers, billmen, and the like? Nay, Nigel, for it has also been very clearly shown that the best foot soldiers unsupported cannot hold their own against the mailed horsemen. To whom then is the victory? Asked Nigel. To him who can mix his horse and foot, using each to strengthen the other. Apart they are weak, together they are strong. The archer who can weaken the enemy's line, the horseman who can break it when it is weakened, as was done at Falkirk and Juplin. There is a secret of our strength. Now touching this same battle of Falkirk, I pray you for one instant to give it your attention. With his whip he began to trace a plan of the Scottish battle upon the dust, and Nigel with knitted brows was trying hard to muster his small stock of brains and to profit by the lecture, when their conversation was interrupted by a strange new arrival. It was a very stout little man, wheezy and purple with haste, who scudded down the rampart as if he were blown by the wind, his grizzled hair flying and his long black gown floating behind him. He was clad in the dress of a respectable citizen, a black jerkin trimmed with sable, a black velvet beaver hat, and a white feather. At the sight of Chandos, he gave a cry of joy and quickened his pace, so that when he did at last reach him, he could only stand gasping and waving his hands. Give yourself time, good Master Wintersole, give yourself time, said Chandos in a soothing voice. The papers, gasped the little man. Oh, my Lord Chandos, the papers. What of the papers, my worthy sir? I swear by our good patron St. Leonard, it is no fault of mine. I had locked them in my coffer, but the lock was forced and the coffer rifled. A shadow of anger passed over the soldier's keen face. How now, Master Mayor? Pull your wits together, and do not stand there babbling like a 3-year child. Do you say that someone hath taken the papers? It is sooth, fair sir. Thrice I have been mayor of the town, and 15 years burgess in Jurat, but never once has any public matter gone awry through me. Only last month there came an order from Windsor on a Tuesday for a Friday banquet, 1,000 souls, for 1,000 plaice, 2,000 mackerel, 500 crabs, 1,000 lobsters, 5,000 whiting. I doubt not, Master Mayor, that you are an excellent fishmonger, but the matter concerns the papers I gave into your keeping. Where are they? Taken, fair sir, gone. And who had dared to take them? Alas, I know not. It was but for as long as you would say an Angelus that I left the chamber, and when I came back there was a coffer, broken and empty, upon my table. Do you suspect no one? There was a varlet who hath come with the last few days into my employ. He is not to be found, and I have sent horsemen along both the Udimore road and that to Rye, that they may seize him. By the help of St. Leonard they can scarce miss him, for one can tell him a bowshot off by his hay. Is it red? Asked Chandos eagerly. Is it fox red? and the man a small man pocked with sunspots and very quick in his movements. It is the man himself. Chandos shook his clenched hand with annoyance, and then set off swiftly down the street. "It is Peter the Red Ferret once more," said he. "I knew him of old in France, where he has done us more harm than a company of men-at-arms. He speaks English as he speaks French, and he is of such daring and cunning that nothing is secret from him. In all France there is no more dangerous man, for though he is a gentleman of blood and coat armor, he takes the part of a spy because of the more danger and therefore the more honor." "But, my fair lord," cried the mayor, as he hurried along, keeping pace with the long strides of the soldier, "I knew that you warned me to take all care of the papers, but surely there was no matter of great import in it? It was but to say what stores were to be sent after you to Calais." "Is that not everything?" cried Chandos impatiently. "Can you not see, O foolish Master Wintersoul, that the French suspect we are about to make some attempt, and that they have sent Peter the Red Ferret, as they have sent him many times before, to get tidings of whither we are bound? Now that he knows that the stores are for Calais, then the French near Calais will take his warning, and so the king's whole plan come to nothing. Then he will fly by water. We can stop him yet. He has not an hour's start. It may be that a boat awaits him at Rye or Hythe, but it is more like that he is all ready to depart from here. Ah, see yonder. I'll warrant that the Red Ferret is on board." Chandos had halted in front of his inn, and now he pointed down to the outer harbor, which lay 2 miles off across the green plain. It was connected by a long winding canal with the inner dock at the base of the hill upon which the town was built. Between the two horns formed by the short curving piers a small schooner was running out to sea, dipping and rising before a sharp southerly breeze. "It is no Winchelsea boat," said the mayor. "She is longer and broader in the beam than ours." "Horses! Bring horses!" cried Chandos. "Come, Nigel, let us go further into the matter." A busy crowd of varlets, archers, and men-at-arms swarmed round the gateway of the sign of the Broom Pod, singing, shouting, and jostling in rough good fellowship. The sight of the tall, thin figure of Chandos brought order amongst them, and a few minutes later the horses were ready and saddled. A breakneck ride down a steep declivity, and then a gallop of 2 miles over the sedgy plain carried them to the outer harbor. A dozen vessels were lying there, ready to start for Bordeaux or Rochelle, and the quay was thick with sailors, labourers, and townsmen, and heaped with wine barrels and wool packs. "Who is warden here?" asked Chandos, springing from his horse. "Batting. Where is cock batting?" "Batting is warden," shouted the crowd. A moment later a short swarthy man, bull-necked and deep-chested, pushed through the people. He was clad in rough russet wool with a scarlet cloth tied round his black curly head. His sleeves were rolled up to his shoulders, and his brown arms, all stained with grease and tar, were like 2 thick gnarled branches from an oaken stump. His savage brown face was fierce and frowning, and was split from chin to temple with the long white wale of an ill-healed wound. "How now, gentles, will you never wait your turn?" he rumbled in a deep, angry voice. "Can you not see that we are warping the rows of Guienne into midstream for the ebb tide? Is this a time to break in upon us? Your goods will go aboard in due season, I promise you. So ride back into the town and find such pleasure as you may, while I and my mates do our work without let or hindrance." "It is the gentle Chandos," cried someone in the crowd. "It is the good Sir John." The rough harbour master changed his gruffness to smiles in an instant. "Nay, Sir John, what would you? I pray you to hold me excused if I was short of speech. But we port wardens are sore plagued with foolish young lordlings, who get betwixt us and our work and blame us because we do not turn an ebb tide into a flood, or a south wind into a north. I pray you to tell me how I can serve you." "That boat," said Chandos, pointing to the already distant sail rising and falling on the waves. "What is it?" Cockbatting shaded his keen eyes with his strong brow's hand. "She has but just gone out," said he. "She is La Pucelle, a small wine sloop from Gascony, homebound and laden with barrel staves." "I pray you, did any man join her at the very last?" "Nay, I know not. I saw no one." "But I know," cried a seaman in the crowd. "I was standing at the wharf side and was nigh knocked into the water by a little red-headed fellow, who breathed as though he had run from a town. Ere I had time to get him a cuff, he had jumped aboard, the ropes were cast off, and her nose was seaward. In a few words, Chandos made all clear to batting, the crowd pressing eagerly round. "Aye, aye," cried a seaman. "The good Sir John is right. See how she points. It is Picari and not Gascony that she will fetch this journey in spite of her wine staves." "Then we must lay her aboard," cried Cockbatting. "Come, lads, here is my own Marie Rose ready to cast off, who's for a trip with a fight at the end of it." There was a rush for the boat, but the stout little seaman picked his men. "Go back, Jerry. Your heart is good, but you are overfat for the work. You, Luke, and you, Thomas, and the two Deeds, and William of Sandgate, you will work the boat. And now we need a few men of their hands. Do you come, little sir?" "I pray you, my dear lord, to let me go," cried Nigel. "Yes, Nigel, you can go, and I will bring your gear over to Calais this night. I will join you there, fair sir, and with the help of St. Paul I will bring this red ferret with me." "Aboard, aboard, time passes," cried Batting impatiently, while already his seamen were hauling on the line and raising the mainsail. "Now then, sirrah, who are you?" It was Aylward, who had followed Nigel and was pushing his way aboard. "Where my master goes, I go also," cried Aylward. "So stand clear, master shipman, or you may come by a hurt." "By St. Leonard, Archer," said Cockbatting, "had I more time I would give you a lesson ere I leave land. Stand back and give place to others." "Nay, stand back and give place to me," cried Aylward, and seizing Batting round the waist, he slung him into the dock. There was a cry of anger from the crowd, for Batting was the hero of all the Cinque-Ports and had never yet met his match in manhood. The epitaph still lingers in which it was said that he could never rest until he had fought in his fill. When, therefore, swimming like a duck, he reached a rope and pulled himself hand over hand up to the quay, all stood aghast to see what fell fate would befall this bold stranger. But Batting laughed loudly, dashing the salt water from his eyes and hair. "You have fairly won your place, Archer," said he. "You are the very man for our work. Where is Black Simon of Norwich?" A tall, dark young man with a long, stern, lean face came forward. "I am with you, Cock," said he, "and I thank you for my place. You can come, Hugh Battlesmen, and you, Hal Masters, and you, Dyken of Rye. That is enough. Now off, in God's name, or it will be night ere we can come up with them." Already the head sails and the mainsail had been raised, while 100 willing hands pulled her off from the wharf. Now the wind caught her, heeling over, and quivering with eagerness like an unleashed hound, she flew through the opening and out into the channel. She was a famous little schooner, the Marie Rose of Winchelsea, and under her daring owner Cockbatting, half trader and half pirate, had brought back into port many a rich cargo taken in mid-channel, and paid for in blood rather than money. Small as she was, her great speed and the fierce character of a master had made her a name of terror along the French coast, and many a bulky Eastlander or Fleming as he passed the narrow seas had scanned the distant Kentish shore, fearing lest an ill-omened purple sail with a gold Christopher upon it should shoot out suddenly from the dim grey cliffs. Now she was clear of the land, with the wind on her larboard quarter, every inch of canvas set, and her high shap bows smothered in foam, as she dug through the waves. Cockbatting trod the deck with head erect and jaunty bearing, glancing up at the swelling sails and then ahead at the little tilted white triangle, which stood out clear and hard against the bright blue sky. Behind was the lowland of the Camber Marshes, with the bluffs of Rye and Winchelsea, and the line of cliffs behind them. On the larboard bow rose the great white walls of Folkestone and of Dover, and far on the distant skyline the grey shimmer of those French cliffs for which the fugitives were making. "By St. Paul," cried Nigel, looking with eager eyes over the tossing waters, "it seems to me, Master Batting, that already we're drawn upon them." The master measured the distance with his keen steady gaze, and then looked up at the sinking sun. "We have still 4 hours of daylight," said he. "But if we do not lay her aboard ere darkness falls, she will save herself, for the night's as black as a wolf's mouth, and if she alter her course, I know not how we may follow her. Unless, indeed, you might guess to which port she was bound and reach it before her." Well thought of, little master, cried Batting. If the news be for the French outside Calais, then Ambleteur's will be nearest to St. Omer. But my sweeting sails 3 paces to that lubber's too, and if the wind hold, we shall have time and to spare. How now, Archer? You do not seem so eager as when you made your way aboard this boat by slinging me into the sea. Aylward sat on the upturned keel of a skiff which lay upon the deck. He groaned sadly and held his green face between his 2 hands. I would gladly sling you into the sea once more, master shipman, said he, if by so doing I could get off this most accursed vessel of thine, or if you would wish to have your tone. Then I would thank you if you would lend me a hand over the side, for indeed I am but a useless weight upon your deck. Little did I think that Samkin Aylward could be turned into a weakling by an hour of salt water. Alas the day that ever my foot wandered from the good red heather of Crooksbury. Cockbatting laughed loud and long. Nay, take it not to heart, Archer, he cried, for better men than you or I have grown upon this deck. The prince himself with 10 of his chosen knights crossed with me once, and 11 set of faces I never saw. Yet within a month they had shown at Cressy that they were no weaklings, as you will do also, I dare swear, when the time comes. Keep that thick head of thine down upon the planks, and all will be well anon. But we raise her with every blast of the wind. It was indeed evident, even to the inexperienced eyes of Nigel, that the Marie Rose was closing in swiftly upon the stranger. She was a heavy, bluff-bowed, broad-sterned vessel, which labored clumsily through the seas. The swift, fierce little Winchelsea boat swooping and hissing through the waters behind her was like some keen hawk whizzing downwind at the back of a flapping, heavy-bodied duck. Half an hour before La Pucelle had been a distant patch of canvas. Now they could see the black hull, and soon the cut of her sails and the lines of her bulwarks. There were at least 12 men upon her deck, and the twinkle of weapons from amongst them showed that they were preparing to resist. Cockbatting began to muster his own forces. He had a crew of 7 rough, hardy mariners, who had been at his back in many a skirmish. They were armed with short swords, but Cockbatting carried a weapon peculiar to himself, a 20-pound blacksmith's hammer, the memory of which, as Batting's cracker, still lingers in the Cinque Ports. Then there were the eager Nigel, the melancholy Aylward, Black Simon, who was a tried swordsman, and 3 archers, Battlesme, Masters, and Dyken of Rye, all veterans of the French war. The numbers in the 2 vessels might be about equal, but Batting, as he glanced at the bold, harsh faces which looked to him for orders, had little fear for the result. Glancing round, however, he saw something which was more dangerous to his plans than the resistance of the enemy. The wind, which had become more fitful and feebler, now fell suddenly away, until the sails hung limp and straight above them. A belt of calm lay along the horizon, and the waves around had smoothed down into a long oily swell, on which the 2 little vessels rose and fell. The great boom of the Marie Rose rattled and jarred with every lurch, and the high thin prow pointed skyward one instant, and seaward the next in a way that drew fresh groans from the unhappy Aylward. In vain Cockbatting pulled on his sheets and tried hard to husband every little wandering gust which ruffled for an instant the sleek rollers. The French master was as adroit a sailor, and his boom swung round also as each breath of wind came up from astern. At last even these fitful puffs died finally away, and a cloudless sky overhung a glassy sea. The sun was almost upon the horizon behind Dungeness Point, and the whole western heaven was bright with the glory of the sunset, which blended sea and sky in one blaze of ruddy light. Like rollers of molten gold, the long swell heaved up channel from a great ocean beyond. In the midst of the immense beauty and peace of nature, the 2 little dark specks with the white sail and the purple rose and fell, so small upon the vast shining bosom of the waters, and yet so charged with all the unrest and the passion of life. The experienced eye of the seaman told him that it was hopeless to expect a breeze before nightfall. He looked across at the Frenchman, which lay less than a quarter of a mile ahead, and shook his gnarled fist at the line of heads which could be seen looking back over her stern. One of them waved a white kerchief in derision, and Cockbatting swore a bitter oath at the sight. By St. Leonard of Winchelsea, he cried, I will rub my side up against her yet. Out with the skiff, lads, and 2 of you to the oars. Make fast a line to the mast. Will, do you go in the boat, Hugh, and I'll make the second. Now if we bend our backs to it, we may have them yet ere night cover them. The little skiff was swiftly lowered over the side, and the slack end of the cable fastened to the after thwart. Cockbatting and his comrades pulled as if they would snap their oars, and the little vessel began slowly to lurch forward over the rollers. But the next moment a larger skiff had splashed over the side of the Frenchman, and no less than 4 seamen were hard at work under her bows. If the Marie Rose advanced a yard, the Frenchman was going too. Again Cockbatting raved and shook his fist. He clambered aboard, his face wet with sweat and dark with anger. "Curse them! They have had the best of us," he cried. "I can do no more. Sir John has lost his papers, for indeed now that night is at hand I can see no way in which we can gain them." Nigel had leaned against the bulwark during these events, watching with keen attention the doings of the sailors, and praying alternately to St. Paul, St. George, and St. Thomas for a slant of wind which would put them alongside their enemy. He was silent, but his hot heart was simmering within him. His spirit had risen even above the discomfort of the sea, and his mind was too absorbed in his mission to have a thought for that which had laid Aylward flat upon the deck. He had never doubted that Cockbatting in one way or another would accomplish his end, but when he heard his speech of despair, he bounded off the bulwark and stood before the seaman with his face flushed and all his soul afire. "By St. Paul, Master Shipman," he cried, "we should never hold up our heads in honor if we did not go further into the matter. Let us do some small deed this night upon the water, or let us never see land again, for indeed we could not wish fairer prospect of winning honorable advancement." "With your leave, little master, you speak like a fool," said the gruff seaman. "You and all your kind as children when once the blue water is beneath you. Can you not see that there is no wind, and that the Frenchman can warp her as swiftly as we? What then would you do?" Nigel pointed to the boat which towed astern. "Let us venture forth in her," said he, "and let us take this ship or die worshipful in the attempt." His bold and fiery words found their echo in the brave, rough hearts around him. There was a deep-chested shout from both archers and seamen. Even Aylward sat up, with a WAN smile upon his green face. But Cockbatting shook his head. "I have never met the man who could lead where I would not follow," said he, "but by St. Leonard, this is a mad business, and I should be a fool if I were to risk my men and my ship. Bethink you, little master, that the skiff can hold only 5, though you lowered her to the water's edge. If there is a man yonder, there are 14, and you have to climb their side from the boat. What chance would you have? Your boat stove and you in the water. There's the end of it. No man of mine goes on such a fool's errand, and so I sway. Then, Master Batting, I must crave the loan of your skiff, for by St. Paul, the good Lord Chando's papers are not to be so lightly lost. If no one else will come, then I will go alone." The shipman smiled at the words, but the smile died away from his lips when Nigel, with features set like ivory and eyes as hard as steel, pulled on the rope so as to bring the skiff under the counter. It was very clear that he would do even as he said. At the same time, Aylward raised his bulky form from the deck, leaned for a moment against the bulwarks, and then tottered aft to his master's side. "Here is one that will go with you," said he, or he would never dare show his face to the girls of Tilford again. "Come, archers, let us leave these salt herrings in their pickle tub and try our luck out on the water." The 3 archers at once ranged themselves on the same side as their comrade. They were bronzed, bearded men, short in stature, as were most Englishmen of that day, but hardy, strong, and skilled with their weapons. Each drew his string from its waterproof case and bent the huge arc of his warbow as he fitted it into the nocks. "Now, master, we are at your back," said they as they pulled and tightened their sword belts. But already Cockbatting had been carried away by the hot lust of battle, and had thrown aside every fear and doubt which had clouded him. To see a fight and not to be in it was more than he could bear. "Nay, have it your own way," he cried, "and may St. Leonard help us, for a mad venture I have never seen. And yet it may be worth the trial. But if it be done, let me have a handling of it. Little master, for you know no more of a boat than I do of a war-horse. The skiff can bear 5 and not a man more. Now, who will come?" They had all caught fire, and there was not one who would be left out. Batting picked up his hammer. "I will come myself," said he. "And you also, little master, since it is your hot head that has planned it. Then there is Black Simon, the best sword of the Cinque-Ports. 2 archers can pull on the oars, and it may be that they can pick off 2 or 3 of these Frenchmen before we close with them. Hugh battles me, and you, Dyken of Rye, into the boat with you." "What?" cried Aylward. "Am I to be left behind? I, who am the squire's own man, ill fare the bowman who comes betwixt me and yonder boat." "Nay, Aylward," said his master, "I order that you stay, for indeed you are sick man. But now that the waves have sunk I am myself again. Nay, fair sir, I pray that you will not leave me behind. You must needs take the space of a better man, for what do you know of the handling of a boat?" said Batting shortly. "No more fool's talk, I pray you, for the night will soon fall. Stand aside." Aylward looked hard at the French boat. "I could swim 10 times up and down Frensham Pond," said he, "and it will be strange if I cannot go as far as that. By these finger bones, Samkin Aylward may be there as soon as you." The little boat with its 5 occupants pushed off from the side of the schooner, and dipping and rising, made its slow way toward the Frenchman. Batting and 1 archer had single oars. The 2nd archer was in the prow, while Black Simon and Nigel huddled into the stern with the water lapping and hissing at their very elbows. A shout of defiance rose from the Frenchmen, and they stood in a line along the side of their vessel, shaking their fists and waving their weapons. Already the sun was level with Dungeness, and the grey of evening was blurring sky and water into one dim haze. A great silence hung over the broad expanse of nature, and no sound broke it save the dip and splash of the oars and the slow, deep surge of the boat upon the swell. Behind them, their comrades of the Marie Rose stood motionless and silent, watching their progress with eager eyes. They were near enough now to have a good look at the Frenchman. One was a big, swarthy man with a long black beard. He had a red cap and an axe over his shoulder. There were 10 other hardy-looking fellows, all of them well armed, and there were 3 who seemed to be boys. "Shall we try a shaft upon them?" asked Hugh Battlesman. "They are well within our bowshot." "Only one of you can shoot at a time, for you have no footing," said Batting. "With 1 foot in the prow and 1 over the thwart you will get your stance. Do what you may, and then we will close in upon them." The archer balanced himself in the rolling boat with the deftness of a man who has been trained upon the sea, for he was born and bred in the Cinque-Ports. Carefully he knocked his arrow, strongly he drew it, steadily he loosed it, but the boat swooped at the instant, and it buried itself in the waves. The 2nd passed over the little ship, and the 3rd struck in her black side. Then in quick succession, so quick that 2 shafts were often in the air at the same instant, he discharged a dozen arrows, most of which just cleared the bulwarks and dropped upon the deck. There was a cry on the Frenchman, and the heads vanished from the side. "Enough!" cried Batting. "1 is down, and it may be 2. Close in, in God's name, before they rally." He and the other bent to their oars, but at the same instant there was a sharp zip in the air and a hard, clear sound like a stone striking a wall. Battlesman clapped his hand to his head, groaned and fell forward out of the boat, leaving a swirl of blood upon the surface. A moment later the same fierceness ended in a loud wooden crash, and a short, thick crossbow bolt was buried deep in the side of their boat. Close in, roared Batting, tugging at his oar. "St. George for England, St. Leonard for Winchelsea. Close in." But again that fatal crossbow twanged. Dyken of Rye fell back with a shaft through his shoulder. "God help me, I can no more," said he. Batting seized the oar from his hand, but it was only to sweep the boat's head round and pull her back to the Marie Rose. The attack had failed. "What now, Master Shipman?" cried Nigel. "What has befallen to stop us? Surely the matter does not end here." 2 down out of 5, said Batting, "and 12 at the least against us. The odds are too long, little master. Let us at least go back, fill up once more, and raise a mantelet against the bolts, for they have an arbalist which shoots both straight and hard. But what we do we must do quickly, for the darkness falls apace." Their repulse had been hailed by wild yells of delight from the Frenchmen, who danced with joy and waved their weapons madly over their heads. But before their rejoicings had finished, they saw the little boat creeping out once more from the shadow of the Marie Rose, a great wooden screen in the bows to protect her from the arrows. Without a pause, she came straight and fast to her enemy. The wounded archer had been put on board, and Aylward would have had his place had Nigel been able to see him upon the deck. The third archer, Hal Masters, had sprung in, and one of the seamen, what Finnis of Hythe. With their hearts hardened to conquer or to die, the five ran alongside the Frenchman and sprang upon her deck. At the same instant a great iron weight crashed through the bottom of their skiff, and their feet had hardly left her before she was gone. There was no hope and no escape save victory. The crossbowman stood under the mast, his terrible weapon at his shoulder, the steel string stretched taut, the heavy bolt shining upon the nut. One life at least he would claim out of this little band. Just for one instant too long did he dwell upon his aim, shifting from the seaman to cock batting, whose formidable appearance showed him to be the better prize. In that second of time Hal Masters' string twanged, and his long arrow sped through the arbalist's throat. He dropped on the deck, with blood and curses pouring from his mouth. A moment later Nigel's sword and Batting's hammer had each claimed a victim and driven back the rush of assailants. The five were safe upon the deck, but it was hard for them to keep a footing there. The French seamen, Bretons and Normans, were stout, powerful fellows, armed with axes and swords, fierce fighters and brave men. They swarmed round the little band, attacking them from all sides. Black Simon felled the black-bearded French captain, and at the same instant was cut over the head and lay with his scalp open upon the deck. The seaman Wat of Hythe was killed by a crashing blow from an axe. Nigel was struck down, but was up again like a flash, and drove his sword through the man who had felled him. But Batting, Masters the archer, and he had been hustled back to the bulwark, and were barely holding their own from minute to minute against the fierce crowd who assailed them, when an arrow coming apparently from the sea struck the foremost Frenchman to the heart. A moment later a boat dashed up alongside, and four more men from a Marie Rose scrambled onto the blood-stained deck. With one fierce rush the remaining Frenchmen were struck down or were seized by their assailants. 9 prostrate men upon the deck showed how fierce had been the attack, how desperate the resistance. Batting leaned panting upon his blood-clotted hammer. "By St. Leonard," he cried, "I thought that this little master had been the death of us all. God, what you were but just in time, and how you came I know not. This archer has had a hand in it, by the look of him." Aylward, still pale from his seasickness and dripping from head to foot with water, had been the first man in the rescue party. Nigel looked at him in amazement. "I sought you aboard the ship, Aylward, but I could not lay eyes on you," said he. "It was because I was in the water, fair sir, and by my hilt. It suits my stomach better than being on it." He answered, "When you first set forth I swam behind you, for I saw that the Frenchman's boat hung by a rope, and I thought that while you kept him in play I might gain it. I had reached it when you were driven back, so I hid behind it in the water and said my prayers as I have not said them for many a day. Then you came again, and no one had an eye for me, so I clambered into it, cut the rope, took the oars which I found there, and brought her back for more men." "By St. Paul, you have acted very wisely and well," said Nigel, "and I think that of all of us it is you who have won most honour this day. But of all these men dead and alive I see none who resembles that red ferret whom my Lord Chandos has described, and who has worked such despite upon us in the past. It would indeed be an evil chance if he has in spite of all our pains made his way to France in some other boat." "That we shall soon find out," said Batting. "Come with me, and we will search the ship from truck to keel ere he escapes us." There was a scuttle at the base of the mast which led down into the body of the vessel, and the Englishmen were approaching this when a strange sight brought them to a stand. A round brazen head had appeared in the square dark opening. An instant afterward a pair of shining shoulders followed. Then slowly the whole figure of a man in complete plate armor emerged on the deck. In his gauntleted hand he carried a heavy steel mace. With this uplifted he moved toward his enemies, silent save for the ponderous clank of his footfall. It was an inhuman, machine-like figure, menacing and terrible, devoid of all expression, slow-moving, inexorable and awesome. A sudden wave of terror passed over the English seamen. One of them tried to pass and get behind the brazen man, but he was pinned against the side by a quick movement, and his brains dashed out by a smashing blow from the heavy mace. Wild panic seized the others, and they rushed back to the boat. Aylward strung an arrow, but his bowstring was damp and the shaft rang loudly upon the shining breastplate and glanced off into the sea. Masters struck the brazen head with a sword, but the blade snapped without injuring the helmet, and an instant later the bowman was stretched senseless on the deck. The seamen shrank from this terrible silent creature and huddled in the stern, all the fight gone out of them. Again he raised his mace and was advancing on the helpless crowd where the brave were encumbered and hampered by the weaklings, when Nigel shook himself clear and bounded forward into the open, his sword in his hand and a smile of welcome upon his lips. The sun had set, and one long mauve gash across the western channel was closing swiftly into the dull grays of early night. Above, a few stars began to faintly twinkle, yet the twilight was still bright enough for an observer to see every detail of the scene. The Marie rose, dipping and rising on the long rollers astern, the broad French boat with its white deck blotched with blood and littered with bodies. The group of men in the stern, some trying to advance and some seeking to escape, all a confused, disorderly, struggling rabble. Then betwixt them and the mast of two figures, the arm-shining man of metal, with hand upraised, watchful, silent, motionless, and Nigel, bareheaded and crouching, with quick foot, eager eyes, and fearless happy face, moving this way and that, in and out, his sword flashing like a gleam of light as he sought at all points for some opening in the brazen shell before him. It was clear to the man in armor that if he could but pen his antagonist in a corner, he would beat him down without fail. But it was not to be done. The unhampered man had the advantage of speed. With a few quick steps, he could always glide to either side and escape the clumsy rush. Aylward and Batting had sprung out to Nigel's assistance, but he shouted to them to stand back, with such authority and anger in his voice that their weapons dropped to their sides. With staring eyes and set features, they stood watching that unequal fight. Once it seemed that all was over with the squire, for in springing back from his enemy, he tripped over one of the bodies which strewed the deck and fell flat upon his back. But with a swift wriggle he escaped the heavy blow which thundered down upon him, and springing to his feet, he bit deeply into the Frenchman's helmet with a sweeping cut in return. Again the mace fell, and this time Nigel had not quite cleared himself. His sword was beaten down, and the blow fell partly upon his left shoulder. He staggered, and once more the iron club whirled upward to dash him to the ground. Quick as a flash it passed through his mind that he could not leap beyond its reach, but he might get within it. In an instant he had dropped his sword, and springing in he had seized a brazen man round the waist. The mace was shortened and the handle jobbed down once upon the bare flaxen head. Then, with a sonorous clang, and a yell of delight from the spectators, Nigel with one mighty wrench tore his enemy from the deck and hurled him down upon his back. His own head was whirling, and he felt that his senses were slipping away, but already his hunting knife was out and pointing through the slit in the brazen helmet. "Give yourself up, fair sir," said he, "never to fishermen and to archers. I am a gentleman of coat armor. Kill me. I also am a gentleman of coat armor. I promise you quarter. Then, sir, I surrender myself to you." The dagger tinkled down upon the deck. Seamen and archers ran forward, to find Nigel half senseless upon his face. They drew him off, and a few deft blows struck off the helmet of his enemy. A head, sharp-featured, freckled and foxy red, disclosed